crowding the command throne of Shipmaster Bray that was set before it. Astra Militarum generals rubbed shoulders with the sister superiors of 3 battle convents. Adeptus Mechanicus Domini stood in clusters of orange, rust, and blood-red robes. Space Marine lords waited with commissars, inquisitors, and the barons of knightly courts. Princeps had come down from their Titan's steel skulls, ill at ease at being surrounded by so many people. There were naval wing commanders and captains of capital ships. Sisters of Silence stood aside from everyone else, their disquieting auras eliciting shudders from those nearest. The augments of Skitari Clade commanders buzzed. Departmentum Unitorum officials talked in low voices. Historiators recorded the occasion discreetly. Every branch of the Imperium's forces, and those who supplied, directed, and supported them, were represented there, whether in person or as one of the ghostly hololiths projected by the servo-skulls swarming above the throng. Through the grand oculus, the plough-blade prow of the Macrag's Honor pointed in challenge at the pit of Raucus. A huge, lazily turning interface between the warp and real space, wreathed in the luminous gases of a dying star. It was a place where nightmares might easily walk, clothed in flesh. The pit of Raucus was an anomaly set apart from the main storm front of the Great Rift, which divided the Imperium in 2. It was an isolated wound, but a deep one. It punched a hole through space-time and ran far into the heart of the warp. It was an area of bruised void, millions of kilometers across, glowing a sickly purple. Towards the middle, its coloration tended to putrid yellow-white, and at the very center, a vast, dark orb, striated like the iris of an eye, rotated with the speed and ferocity of a pulsar. At the edge of this blot on reality languished a star system. It had never been settled or given a name by mankind, but bore the Adeptus Astra designation of 108 Beta Calipus 9.2. The sun was a medium red star dwarfed by the pit. Gravitic shear drew long plumes of incandescent gas from the star towards the anomaly. In the years since the Great Rift had opened, the sun had shrunk by 1/10. The planets that orbited it were going dark. Tendrils of glowing matter twisted out from the fringes of the spinning eye, merging with and bending the surrounding star gas into looping walls that reached towards the greater slash of the Cicatrix Maledictum, like parasitic worms migrating from their host. Such breaches between dimensions were once terrifying anomalies. In these dark times, they had become commonplace. Whereas before there had been the Eye of Terror and the lesser Maelstrom, now the Great Rift split the galaxy side to side, its depths interfacing directly with the Immaterium, and 1,000 places like the pit of Raucus pierced the flesh of reality, disgorging unnatural energies. The pit was named after a demon prince Guilliman had slain. From its churning depths came unnatural plagues and fleets of half-mad sentient vessels crewed by children's nightmares. Ghostly armies of impossible monsters spilled gibbering into real space. Things spawned by the collective horrors of all history's thinking beings emerged from dark corners on worlds for light years around it. Most of these things only had a brief foothold in reality, and the more esoteric types dissipated as soon as they were birthed, smeared to glowing corpuscent by the laws of material physics. But nature's iron grip had loosened. The pit of Raucus was an open gate to the demonic legions of the greater powers. Empowered by the wills of their dark gods and sustained by the unnatural energies of the rift, armies of fell entities emerged from Raucus. The terror they generated fed them further, and so the cycle of horror continued. Guilliman stared unflinchingly into the unclean cyst of the pit. "Another lost system," Tribune Maldavar Colquan of the Adeptus Custodes spoke angrily. 5 others of his order stood guard behind the Primarch. When he spoke, and it was not often, it was as if every affront to the Imperium he saw compounded his shame. He was well aware that for 10 millennia the Emperor's bodyguard had done nothing. All he had to offer in response was gall. Guilliman privately agreed with this damning assessment. When he had returned to Terra, he had discovered a warrior brotherhood blinded by grief, uninterested in anything that happened beyond the walls of the imperial palace. Crisis after crisis had battered the foundations of the Imperium, and the Adeptus Custodes had retreated further from view with each one. They had finally come out from behind the palace walls. Small groups of them operated the galaxy over, but the pendulum had swung too far the other way. The Golden Warriors of Terror were in danger of being blinded by rage.
"It was not lost, because it never belonged to the Imperium," said Guilliman. "This target is nevertheless worthy, and we shall claim it as our own. See how the enemy gather around it. Their temple nears completion."
A hololithic strategic display showed the system and its monstrous parasite as a series of neutral graphics tagged with data signifiers. It looked so bland rendered that way, an innocuous nebula. The Chaos Fleet around 108 Beta Calipus 9.2 was invisible to the unaided eye, but clear enough to the augurs of the Macrag's honor, and bright dots of light tagged with data screed swarmed at high anchor around a single point, the orbital fane of the Word-Bearers. The Primarch's voice needed no amplification to reach all of his commanders. His words carried into the furthest reaches of the command deck. When he spoke, all stopped to listen.
"An orbital temple is under construction here. It must be destroyed. This is a staging post for our enemies, but it is for no mundane resupply that they come to the pit of Rorkus."
He pointed directly at the black eye in the anomaly.
"They come here to make blood sacrifice, and call upon their diabolical gods to favor them with aid from their servants. From this rift, demons walk and lend their power to the traitors. Such doorways need closing. The ability to do so eludes us for now, but they will be closed, all of them. I swear this in my father's name. Until then, the monsters that come from within them will be beaten back, and the thresholds guarded by the mightiest warriors the Imperium can spare. So we shall divide the mortal servants of Chaos from their unnatural allies. The Indomitus Crusade has swept from one end of the galaxy to the other, bringing retribution to our foes. I propose we add one further victory to our tally."
The crowd cheered loudly. Booming transhuman voices joined with chittering data augmenters. The pit grew quickly in the oculus as the fleet accelerated towards its target. The Indomitus Crusade was vast in size. Dozens of capital ships led many subfleets. The artificial stars of their engine stacks flared brightly as they maneuvered into attack positions. Guilliman had the armada arranged like a five-toed claw. The long talons were individual battle groups, arrayed in lines to pound the enemy as they passed. The palm was a wall of ships, with the Macrag's honor at its center. The Primarch intended to trap the foe against the mobile fortress of the palm as the fingers of the claw slowed and closed, as surely as a clenching fist, around the rear of the enemy fleets. A further battle group ran outwards from the main line of advance towards the pit. Within the knot of vessels at its center, the null ships of the Sisters of Silence flew protected by 3 battleships. Kilometers long, the battleships were cathedrals of war, unused to escort duty, but the move was justified. For the foe they faced, these mighty vessels were not the battle group's deadliest weapon. The ships of the Sisters, large, black, and swift, were the key to success. The command crew of the Macrag's honor were a mixture of standard human, space marine, and Primaris space marines. Humans predominated. Though they wore the uniforms of Ultramar, they had been gathered to the Indomitus Crusade from all across the Imperium. Their diverse origins had been no barrier to Guilliman forging them into an effective unit. Above the Vox pits, the Master Divulgatus swung his command pulpit around. Tall banks of organ pipes, each one a powerful voxmeter, hid him from the neck down. His head was encased in a bulky communications unit. Only his mouth was visible. "The null ships will be in position in an hour, my lord." "Seconded," said the Master Augurum from his own station high up on the stepped walls of the command bridge, a sub-kingdom of screens and hard-wired servitors. Runic icons blinked on the hololithic Tacticarium orb, dotted lines flickering into being, describing their trajectory and ultimate position. Before the Crusade, the Macragge's Honor had undergone an extensive refit in shipyards of the Ring of Iron around Mars, and the command deck had been entirely reconfigured from Gilliman's day. Archimagos' call stamp was on everything. New machines and unheard-of configurations of old devices replaced equipment that had been in use for tens of centuries. The tech priests had been outraged, but Gilliman had silenced them, and Call had had his way. The result was worth upsetting the Adeptus Mechanicus's religious sensibilities. The machinery still had the ugly look of 41st millennium technology, but Gilliman reckoned there was a 10% increase in tactical responsiveness alone. Multiple redundancies and newly integrated systems allowed for better survivability. Dozens of tech priests from Call's faction labored to keep the Archimagos' finely balanced design working, but it did work, and excellently so.
"My lords and ladies," said Gilliman, "today will be a great day for the Imperium. I commend you to the protection of the Emperor, the Lord of mankind. Now go to your vessels and war machines, to your transports, to war! 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 They responded.
The majority of the commanders left quickly. Hololiths blinked out. Soon the command deck was empty, but for Gilliman's core command staff and the ship's bridge officers, though that still amounted to almost 400 people. About the graphic of 108 Beta Calipus 9.2, the dull red signifiers of enemy craft began to move.
"The enemy responds," said Gilliman. "All fleet to engage, full thrust. We fall upon them without mercy."
Shipmaster Bray stood from his throne and leaned upon the array of view screens that clustered about his station.
"Macragge's Honor to full thrust," he said. "All fleet to full thrust." "All fleet to full thrust," repeated the Master Divulgatus to his opposite numbers across the fleet. A ripple of activity spread out across the tiered workbanks and station pits of the deck. Field integrity technicians adjusted the energy matrices that stabilized the ship's frame, compensating for the coming acceleration. Enginarium tech priests passed on minute adjustments to their counterparts deep in the ship's engine halls. Reactor outputs were carefully monitored. "Reactor ready," reported a metal-faced tech adept. "Enginarium ready," said a man in a smart ensign's uniform.
A coterie of electro-priests began the hymn Body Electric. Tech priests muttered their prayers over their desks. The Master Motivatus gripped the rail of his podium. Around him, in a circular array, a dozen servitors sat, the calculations required to move the Macragge's Honor from its current position into its attack run flickering through their butchered brains. Cogitators bleeped out rapid beats of binaric as the data was transferred to them.
"Compliance! Engines operating at maximum efficiency," the servitor said with one voice. "Full thrust in 3, 2, 1, mark," said the Master Motivatus. "Mark! Engaging!"
A rumbling sounded aft, drawing closer like the approach of a great engine. A tremor passed up the ship, growing stronger. Machines burbled as it passed through their fabric. It joined with the never-ending thrum of the ship's systems, became one with it, and passed from the crew's notice. Acceleration was a gentle push in the
Hey,
chest,
comrade, how we doing?
a heaviness that dragged at the heels. The Macragge's Honor built up to 100.
Yeah, so I've been working on the Stormraven for a
the
bit.
fleet's engines blinked into life as all the vessels
Kind of got the
began
top
their
side
acceleration,
almost
holding formation
done. I'll flip it
perfectly.
around in a
108
second.
Beta Calipus 9.2 grew rapidly. The first round of projectiles came at them not long after. The smaller destroyers escorting the larger
Listening
cruisers and
to
battleships fired
Dark
anti-munitions weapons in
Imperium by
response.
Guy Haley.
A series of pinprick explosions started up and
Paint-
soon
you're
became
painting
a
too?
constant accompaniment to the advance. advance.
Still got your
A handful of
Vestroyans to
torpedoes got
do,
through,
or
dangerous for their kinetic energy more than the payloads they carried.
another
But they
project?
exploded upon the void shields of the ships, hundreds of meters short of the hulls.
It's been a while.
The
You might
shields
be done
blinked
with your
and flashed as
Vestroyans.
they shunted destructive energies into the warp.
Big
Gilliman watched
batch,
without
finished
concern.
all the
Such
mostly
long-range
finished
exchanges
models. Okay,
were
yeah,
never
yeah, yeah.
decisive,
Cool.
nor particularly damaging. On the main tacticarium, the fingers of Gilliman's claw formation expanded.
I listened to a Caiaphas Cain
to adjust the position. But for the
audio
moment, the
novel.
most
That
important
guy's
part of
cool.
his plan was being performed correctly. The null ships were moving between the pit of Raucus and the planet. Their presence would disrupt any demonic incursion that might come through, while Sisters of Silence and Grey Knights
painting your
Adeptus
Marines now.
Astartes
Okay,
were stationed
cool.
across the fleet, ready to deal with any on-board
What's your
manifestations.
chapter
There would be no supernatural
or your
aid
color
for the enemy.
scheme?
108 Beta Calipus 9.2 grew larger and larger. It was a dull orange ball of a world with ice caps of frozen water. Miserable patches of green covered its equatorial regions, but in the main it was desert, another low-grade world too remote to settle. They were close enough now that the engine flares of the enemy were visible to the naked eye. The Chaos ships were spreading out, attempting to intercept the fingers of the Claw head-on. Gilliman watched their maneuvering. There was one warlord in control. He could see that by the way the ships were operating. They moved in close groups, each warband sticking to its own. Chaos resisted authority. It was a weakness the Primarch had exploited.
Blood
time and
Angels.
again.
That's right. That's right.
4 smaller groups struck out on their
You
own,
showed
poorly
me.
coordinated
You might
with
have
each
showed
other
me.
and with the 5th.
You know, it's been a while.
This last formation
Don't
made
have
up
the greatest of
majority
memories.
fleet, and its ships moved in good order, fanning out
Sweet.
in a
Hell
standard
yeah. Hell
interception pattern
yeah.
towards the leftmost of the 2 leading Imperial battle groups. The challenge was there in the Word-Bearers' fleet.
I vaguely
They were
recall.
behind the construction of many temples to the Dark Gods. Something of the scale of the orbital fane was rarely undertaken by other traitors. The Word-Bearers were fanatical in their devotion, raising giant temples on the worlds they conquered, and they would fight to the last to defend them. The leading elements of Gilliman's fleet started firing as soon as they approached to within 1,000,000 kilometers.
Oh, I might have switched up
Broad
the
spreads of torpedoes fanned out in
slideshow
intersecting patterns. Cannons hurled
on here.
multi-ton anti-ship shells at the enemy. Such
Cool, working
munitions
on
would take
dreadnought
minutes
weathering.
to arrive, and most would not hit their targets.
patching up
but they were
mistakes
not
here and there.
intended to.
Yeah.
Gilliman was closing off avenues of maneuver.
I feel like
for the
that's
traitors
always
with
a.
streams of explosives,
I think
forcing
that's
them
always
into
an
the positions
ongoing
he wanted.
process.
The second finger of his
'Cause
claw
when are
was
you really
intercepted
done?
by one of the smaller enemy battle groups. Both were traveling at such speed that only a brief flurry of broadsides was exchanged before their respective velocities tore them
But
away
I
from
dig
each other.
weathering. I'm starting to
The
enjoy
discharge
it
of
more.
powerful Nova cannons obscured the combat. A brighter light suggested a reactor death had consumed a vessel. When the augers cleared and the light died away, the Imperial battle group was speeding on, leaving one of its cruisers wallowing afire. The traitor fleet had come off worse, being badly mauled. 4 grand cruisers made up the core of its force, surrounded by a crowd of lesser ships. 2 of the cruisers had been hit hard. One listed off the flight path of its fellows, engines out, while fires burned all along the side of the other, and it was falling behind. The remaining 2 cruisers were coming straight for the
You
flat
sold your
hull of the
knight,
Claw's
and
palm.
so cool, and then so you
Gilliman's
were able
hands
to buy
tapped
something
out
special for
targeting
yourself.
data on his instruments. Wall grouping
And what was
gamma.
that? What was that
Target
something
and
special?
annihilate traitor battle group, he said. The Master Divulgatus relayed his orders to the relevant ships. They are rash, said Tribune Colquan. They cannot get by us. Perhaps, said Gilliman. They may be attempting to disrupt our formation. To damage one battle group, we have 7, and the wall of the claw palm. Then to distract us, or perhaps there has been a falling out between their warlords. Or
this up
maybe
here.
they are running. Gilliman took his eyes from his displays and the tacticarium to spare the
See where
custodies
we're
a
at
glance.
for your reading.
I make no
So,
assumptions. Neither should you.
It's like a desert.
As he
It's like a
spoke,
dessert
his
to the full
scar
meal
itched,
of your
reminding him
Warhammer
of the last
painting
time he
journey.
had been in error.
I
A
like that.
situation
I
the
like that. Good
Primarch had
analogy.
sworn privately never to repeat.
Um,
Colquan's lip curled.
Cool.
disliked being
So
lectured on tactics.
this is what I've
Gilliman
gotten
did not relent.
so far.
Though they remained
as far as
superlative
progress.
individual warriors,
Yes,
the
here we
Adeptus
go.
Custodes had rarely
The
served as
link.
generals since the old times,
Let's check
and
it out.
centuries of isolationism had dulled what command abilities they had once possessed. Never underestimate the enemy, Colquan. 9 times
cool.
out
Is that a
of
little
10,
cha-
a
is
mixed
that a
group
chaos
of
guy in
traitors
front?
will be disorganized and internally divisive. But the 10th time, they will surprise and destroy you. Their greatest lords can forge the most antagonistic warbands
Now,
into a devastating
what you
fighting
painted?
force. Their intentions here are counter-envelopment and delay. Their sorcerers will be attempting to summon
1
demonic
armor.
allies, while their battle fleet keeps us occupied.
Is that
He glanced at
so
his
if I were to
concilious
look at him from
arcana,
front to
several
back, what
Space
number would
Marine
that be?
and
1, 2,
Primaris
3, 4,
librarians
5?
stationed close at hand. The mortal humans looked pained by the nearby Sisters of Silence. It is so, confirmed their leader, Codicia Donas Maxim of the Aurora chapter. There is a weakening in the Veil. The warp is unquiet. Then they are attempting to bring in warp-spawned aid. It will not help them.
So does it start with
Gilliman
Mark
put
1
from
in
his
the
mind
back?
the unspeakable
Mark 1,
things the
2, 3,
sorcerers would be
4,
doing. The creatures of
5?
the gods would only come to
Would 5
offerings
be the
of
front
blood,
one?
souls, and pain. My lord, said the Master Augurum,
Looks like that
primary
kind of
target will be within
seems the
range in 10
evolution.
minutes, 9 seconds. He's 50 seconds off
in the
in his
shades.
estimation, said Colquan.
Okay, Mark 1.
If you
yeah.
prefer, you can take his place, Tribune.
Okay, that looks more
Colquan made a dismissive
like the
noise.
paneling on the shoulder blade.
The main
or the
body of
shoulder
the Chaos
armor.
Fleet was
That's
coming
kinda
into
cool.
range of the Imperial battle groups.
Very
The various
samurai
signifiers for each
armor-ish.
enemy vessel acquired screeds of tagged data as the augurs of the fleet gathered more
So funny,
information.
he's got shades.
5 ancient
They're probably
battleships
like,
formed the
yeah,
core
they're
of
not
the
shades.
chief
They're
group.
like ballistic
3 were of
goggles
the
or whatever.
word-bearers, traitorage, as Gilliman had expected. The remaining 2 belonged to the Iron Warriors. Ancient beacons in their corrupted hulls broadcast codes dating back to the Great Crusade. Gilliman recognized the names of 2 of the ships. The fleets of Chaos often differed to those of the Imperium, incorporating many classes of ship no longer produced. Their battleships were spear-headed things, sleek and deadly, superior patterns from a more enlightened time.
Okay.
The remaining 3 subgroups of Chaos vessels were
Excuse me.
speeding past the outstretched fingers of the Claw to get behind
Well,
the
so just trying to
Imperial
throw
fleet
in some
and engage their
some
vulnerable
shade wash into
One
those
flotilla bore the markings
line
of the Lords of Pain,
recesses in there.
once loyal chapter.
And then it's gonna
whose
get as
full
dirty
strength
as the,
returned to
as the
Chaos
top
during the
was.
Noctis Aeterna. The rest were motley collections of pirate vessels and mixed ships from the
So I'm
traitor
not going to
legions
be
and other
too worried
warfare.
about
The 3 lesser battle groups could be ignored.
kind of stuff
for
that I
now.
go over.
Space Marine ships were line breakers, intended to crash
The
through
Thunder
enemy lines
Warriors.
and deliver their
Thunder
warriors to the
Warriors. I
surface
don't know
before
who they
disengagement.
are.
They were less effective
got
in
Google
void
up.
combat. The battleships were a bigger problem. They had arrayed themselves into an arrowhead that stepped up as it went back. A formation like that could do serious damage to the wall as the 2 formations
Don't.
passed through each other. As one,
Wiki,
enemy
Thunder
opened fire
Warriors
with their
Wiki.
prow
Here we
weapons.
are.
lance beams slashed across the void,
Ancient
splashing
records
to
as
blinding
the
displays
Thunder
of displacement
Legion.
energies on the void shields.
Thunder
A
Regiments.
glancing blow off the Macragg's Honor's forward shield lit up the deck with lilac energy discharge. Energy
Oh boy.
waves from an off-target Nova cannon shot sent ripples of sparks.
They were the
into
subject
shields
of the
six
Order
ships
66
nearest
of the
flagship.
Warhammer universe.
They
Oh
are
no.
targeting our position.
So they were the
said the
Jedi
Master
that got
Any fool can see
66,
that, muttered Colquhoun.
or were they
The
the
Tribune's contempt for
executioners? No,
baseline
they were the
humanity
ones getting
troubled Gilliman.
86, 66.
You have spent your life guarding the Emperor, yet you forget who the Emperor guards in his turn, said Gilliman. Be more forgiving. As you wish, said Colquhoun. Traditionally, the Adeptus Custodes had taken orders only from their own officers and the Emperor. That was until Gilliman had been declared Imperial Regent, the Emperor's living voice. Hold course, Gilliman ordered. All power to forward void shields. Battle groups 3 and 5, break off and engage outflanking enemy elements. Target all Lords of Pain Chapter assets. All fleet to fire on targets of opportunity as subsidiary enemy groupings pass.
All batteries load for close-range combat. Prepare prow weapons for forward fire. Charge lance batteries to maximum. Nova cannons to draw firing solutions ready for my order. Various stations reported their understanding of Gilliman's order. Activity on the command deck intensified.
They were
On the
the
forward oculus,
precursor
the
to the
ships
Space
grew from
Marines that
flex
the
to
Emperor used
objects
to
the
conquer
size of
Earth.
models,
Yep, they wore
then
the Mark
bigger,
One.
swelling
And,
as the Indomitus
oh,
Crusade
that's
fleet
right.
swept in
He
at
took
high
them
speed.
back. He took them out.
Perspective
Back.
from the void
I do
lies.
recall hearing some
When
of
the
that
ships
with the
seemed close
lore
enough
being
to
like,
touch,
yep. And
they
isn't that like the
continued to
great
grow.
secret, like
Their
the
spear prows went from
the-
scalpel sharp to giant blunt
the
cliff
beautiful
walls
lie?
bristling with sensor spikes and weapons cupolas. My lord? Asked Bray questioningly. No order to fire, said Gilliman. A storm of laser and solid shot fire blasted from the forward batteries of the Chaos ships. Gilliman ignored it and swept his gaze over the enemy, seeking weak points no augurs could see. Another barrage of lance strikes sparked off the forward shields. The majority of fire was coming at the Macragge's honor, the Chaos battleships adjusting position to track its approach. Forward void shields failing, called out the Master Scutum. We have multiple target locks on the flagship, reported the Master Augurum. My lord, said Bray again. He was remarkably calm, more curious to see what the Primarch would do than anything.
Oh, you want to do
Men like
Baltimore
Bray
episode?
were rare.
Baltimore
A moment,
episode?
said
Sure.
Gilliman. His
Give me
fingers
1
danced
second.
along the gel screen,
Totally
the giving material distorting
hook
as he
that
touched
up.
it. Schematics and auger data flashed up in quick succession on phosphor displays and minor hololiths. Gilliman read each page quicker than a man could blink, processing volumes worth of data in seconds. There. A void shield flicker,
Cool.
out of syncopation with its
Let's
pulse
see.
modulators.
Let's see
A
where
weak
we're
spot.
at.
That vessel.
I'm gonna pause that. Pretty sure that's like not supposed to be on YouTube anyway. Let's go to my Baltimore guide, playlists, Space Marines, Sisters of Timeline, story compilations. No. Do we know what the episode's called? Is it called Thunder Warriors? Thunderfire Cannons. Let me go back. Imperium. View playlist. Salamanders, Titans, Dark Angels, Dreadnoughts, Land Raiders, Death Company, Tempests, Thunder Warriors. Found it. Cool.
A long, long time ago.
Let me know if the volume needs adjusting.
For Sergeant Fortuno, the last 10 minutes had been a blur, a terrible blur. He had been ordered to go into the old quarter to track down one man. His eyes widened to almost bursting when he was instructed to take his own and 2 more units with him to be sure. 30 Astartes, 3 full squads, just to take down one man. What was he, a Primarch? In the next half-day he learned the hard way. They had been tracking him in the streets, closing the net, when matters suddenly turned on them as they strung themselves out to make sure he could not escape. The net was wide. Tiberius' squad was strung out thus when it came. One after another of them in quick succession was ended, the life signs going flat in mid-instances. Fortuna ordered the men to close ranks and almost bunker. What in the name of the Emperor and all his sons could do this to Astartes? Gracchus' squad was there 1 minute, gone the next. He heard them shouting, as something large had just appeared amongst them and was killing fast. The one sentence he made out was confusing. "It's in power armor." Finally, it came to their turn. But it did not speak, or pounce on them. It just walked towards them, as bold as brass, as clear as day. A massive man, but definitely a human, but too big to be even an Astartes. It was wearing an archaic set of power armor, the likes he had never seen before. But for all its simplicity, it protected the monster within as he charged at them. It took many shots, but few penetrated its armor. When he hit the squad, he went through them like a hot knife through butter. It crushed them and killed them, all until it got to him. Armor damaged in places, blood soaked. It was slower now. As it reached toward the sergeant, his power sword leapt up and cut off both the extended hands. The Astartes then, without a nanosecond of hesitation, stepped in and impaled the huge being with his power sword. It plunged dead center, between where an Astartes' two hearts are, but most definitely it severed its spinal cord. A stroke that would kill a Marine instantly. Yet still this being lived. As it slowly toppled backwards against the wall, it slid down, leaving a large red patch across the wall. The sun lit its face in a golden halo as he closed his eyes, basking for a moment. He was dying. His eyes opened. A trickle of blood came out of his mouth before he started to quietly speak. How could he? We marched for him. We fought for him. We bled for him. We died for him. Everything he has today, everything he has achieved, everything he owns was bought with our toil, our suffering. He was our leader, our general, our king. We trusted him. We would have worshipped him if he would have allowed it. Nothing he asked was too much. Never anything we gave enough. He was our lord, and we would have followed him into hell if he had but asked. But he betrayed us. How could he? The last battle of the war. The last outpost of resistance on a conquered world. We wondered why he did not just loose nuclear weapons at it and flatten it. Mount Ararat were the very last separatists on Terra huddled awaiting the end of all things. One last obstacle to the beginning of a bright new era. The Emperor's rule, a unified Terra, a unified home for humanity. We did not fight for this, it is true. We fought because we loved it. We fought because we were raised on conflict and slaughter. We fought because he made us anew, made us unstoppable, unbeatable. But most of all, we fought for him, for the Emperor. It was to be the last object lesson, you see. We were not distributed much ammunition. We were told we would not need it. The entirety of the remaining Thunder Warriors would scale the mountain and plant the flag of the Emperor upon its summit and usher in the new Golden Age. It was going to be a bloody assault, but the result was foregone. They would not stand a chance against us, his Thunder Warriors. And so it was. It was easy. Bloody, but easy. Proudly we stood arrayed for a parade on the Mount of Ararat, waiting our reward, waiting our acclaim.
Isn't
The
Mount
war
Ararat
was
something
over.
biblical too?
The deed was done.
Like Noah's Ark biblical?
When the custodians, the Emperor's personal guard, arrived and took up positions at the edge of the plateau, we assumed it was to add to the event, the pomp. After all, it was a day of circumstance. Then the nightmare began. The custodians leveled their weapons and walked towards us, opening up. Their fire seared into our ranks and cut us down in our droves. In confusion and pain, we ran one way or another trying to escape, but there was none. I even thought I saw him there. I will never be certain, but I think I saw Thunder Warriors fly into the air so high that only he could have been doing it. A few of us broke the spell of confusion and our instincts kicked in. We charged the lines of custodies, and with great losses we broke through. Pitifully few of us, but I was one. We ran. We ran and ran, and have never stopped running. Unlike most of my brothers, I am more stable. I have lasted by hook or by crook, a gene splice here, a concoction there. But each day has been a battle. It became a battle I no longer wished to win. So I let them find me. I let you find me. One last battle, one last day of fire and swords
Oh yeah,
and skill
definitely
and
bunches
honor.
of
I have bested over a
Christianity
store of the things
undertones.
created to replace me. I can die at peace with honor.
It's like, it's
I
kind of
go,
funny that, like, when I first heard,
You think
to me, it's
you
like the
love
Emperor of
him,
Mankind is
do
God,
anything
and then
for
it's just
him,
like all his sons
for
are just like
Gigi.
a bunch of
You
Jesus
think he loves you, that he honors
spread
his
around.
warriors.
Yeah, each one of them
He
is
does not.
Jesus.
You are as I was, just his latest tool. He will discard you.
But then again,
when
I
your
mean, it's just
usefulness
like,
has elapsed. He will kill you
just
all.
like most
Like he
religions are
killed
the
us.
same or very, very
He's
similar
honored.
in all
His
aspects.
loyal.
Why would
Thunder
Warhammer kind of be
warriors.
any different? You know, it's going to follow the same principles.
How could he?
I like the Sisters
With
of
that,
Battle. They are
the huge
definitely
man's eyes glazed
zealots
for the
most
last time.
part. They are
A single tear drawing a pitiful trail down his
all
already
in.
graying cheek.
Say it's alright. Say it's alright.
Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and history of the Warhammer 40K universe. Today, we shall take a necessary step backward in time, to the era before the Great Crusade, over 10,000 years before the present timeline of the setting. Today, we discuss, in brief only, the Thunder Warriors. Not only are they a fundamental part of the history of the Imperium, and show the development of the Space Marines, but their tragic tale also shines a light into one of the murkier edges of the character or purpose of the Master of Mankind, the Emperor. An important step to take for an entry I am working on. For there are so many ways to view the Emperor, but an Arthur or Solomon he is certainly not. He is as complicated as any character you will find in this grim and dark universe. To a certain extent, it could be argued that he is its most important character. But let the digression end, for today we talk of the Thunder Warriors. What were they? When did they fight? For whom and why? Well, I hope my introductory story has shed a little light at least, but let us get into it. In the times before the Emperor arose, the human race had gone from titans bestriding the galaxy to being on the verge of annihilation. Human technological marvels knew few limits, but this enlightened age of prosperity and peace was not to last. A myriad of woes occurred in short order, and the previously beneficial government fell, as planets were cut off from each other and pandemonium and horror ensued. What then came were millennia of suffering and regression. On Holy Terra, the birthplace of humanity, previously called Earth, it was probably one of the worst of all. The technology of destruction was still available on Earth, though all progress had stopped. But still, weapons of war and despicable practices in gene manipulation were rife and unrestrained. So tyrants and despots arose, one after another, again and again. They were soon dubbed techno-barbarian kings, as they had all of the technology one could ask, but not one scrap of civility in them. The wars were horrific, and nuclear exchanges smashed and irradiated huge swathes of the globe. Added to this were entire nations controlled by Xenos, aliens, or by psychos and warp entities, demons. It was unfettered war on every conceivable level, and fought with a barbarity and brutality that is beyond conception in gentler times. To this backdrop, the Emperor arose. But before he revealed himself, he had already laboured for centuries on the creation of an army. His genetic mastery was more than many of his competitors, and he forged many a strain of genetically augmented super soldiers. His most potent, bar the Primarchs, were ever his custodian guards. Despite their potence, the time and resources it took to create one were preclusive of massed formations. So there were many stages, but one of the most important and widespread were the Thunder Warriors. Soldiers made from a different clay to fight a different war. For the thing that the Emperor required to do was to gain dominance of Terra. From there, he could harness its resources and then build and unleash his planned crusade across the stars. But perhaps the hardest war the Emperor ever fought, bar possibly the Horus Heresy, must have been the Wars of Unification. So many enemies, so various strengths, so terrible in their aspect and their power, they deployed their own forms of enhanced warriors, either robotically or genetically or even warp-twisted. The wars were to be fought with a level of ferocity that few can grasp, so weapons of unquenchable anger and destructive ability would be required. So did the Emperor recruit from the most vicious tribes and material, and then enhance them to a degree only slightly below that of a custodian, in strength and resilience, power and speed. The Thunder Warriors were much stronger than a Space Marine. Much. But corners were either cut by design or out of pragmatism. For the Thunder Warriors were always unstable. Often it would be a mental instability that would make them burst into unpredictable hyper-rage that could lead to a rampage. But it was more often physical instability, the heart exploding under the pressure, their minds collapsing. Some accounts could be hyperbolic, but it was recounted that some would simply twist inside their own skin or become geysers of blood at any time. Many will say that the Emperor cut costs and time required to perfect the process in his desire to unify Terra. Many will say that the Emperor was learning as he went and perfected the process in the Astartes, trading some raw power for longevity and stability. Many will say that the Emperor knew that they were a blunt instrument and that he required to bring the horrors on Terra to an end, and that he knew they would outlive their usefulness. So, like many thousands of Roy Batties, they were not built to last. These will also state that the ticking time bomb within all Thunder Warriors meant they would never be an issue for long if they did rebel, for in a short time they would simply burn out. The light that burns, as they say. The Thunder Warriors were the bulk of the Emperor's primary forces all throughout the Unification Wars. They fought all of the horrors of that age and were perfectly designed for it. Their power meant few could stand against them in the field. Their enhanced resistance to psychers and the warp even outshone those of the later Astartes, so they were equipped to strike down most enemies. They died in their thousands as the Emperor continued his genetic works and formulated the Primarchs and later the Astartes, the Space Marines, from their templates. As the war progressed, the Emperor's gene labs stopped producing Thunder Warriors and exclusively made the new format of gene soldiers, the Astartes, the Space Marines. Whatever one might think of the Emperor's modus operandi, his next actions were very direct. When the last nations fell before his grinding advance, only one place remained, a small rebel enclave on Mount Ararat. The Emperor amassed all the Thunder Warriors that remained, and in one hammer blow he sent them all in to wipe out the last separatists. What is told to the Imperium, even to this very day, is that the very last Thunder Warrior placed the flag of the Emperor into the carcass of the very last separatist that he had slain. Then that proud Thunder Warrior, the last of his kind, died of his wounds. Poetic, tragic, fine example of patriotic zeal and self-sacrifice, a shining beacon for the generations to come. Alas, it is a lie. None can really know why it happened, not now. Some will say the Emperor identified a coup. These warriors, having no enemy to fight, must have planned their own future for when the war was over. Some will say the Emperor could not permit them to be at large in his newly civilized world. Some will say the Emperor saw them as a tool, that it simply outlived its usefulness. For whatever reason, the Custodian Guard were ordered to surround Mount Ararat, and then to slaughter every last surviving Thunder Warrior. Some tales hint that the Emperor may have even taken a hand in it personally, but most details state it may have just been his guard. But they wiped them out. The warriors that had given the Emperor victory had given him the jewel in the crown, terror, the cradle of humanity. These warriors he slew without pity or mercy. It is a secret he has kept from his Astartes, his Primaris, and his population for the long, long life of the Imperium. None know of this secret. So, if this is the Emperor's pathway, his character, an indication of his morality, his will as a human, powerful and immortal human, but a human, just imagine what he will be able to do if or when he has all of the power of a god. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to the Thunder Warriors and joining me in a quick glimpse at the darker underbelly of the setting. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. If so, then please do hit the notifications button. I would not want you to miss out. If you are a regular gentle listener and see the worth in what we are doing, then do please consider supporting us on Patreon if funds allow. There will be a link in the comments section.
Yeah, that was definitely
Now,
Order 66.
no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun.
Brutal. Yeah, it's definitely treachery.
Custodian. The frustration amongst the support
yeah.
staff was palpable. It was all that the general could do not to realize and justify it, to condone it, by expressing any reaction to their reinforcements. General Ibrahim merely raised an eyebrow and his hand, silencing the growing muttering. But it was hard, damnably hard, not to at least tut. In reality, he wanted to rage and spit and scream at the betrayal, but Ibrahim was not a general for nothing. His iron will and ability to size up a situation kicked in, without any requirement to summon these most treasured of his attributes. He would see what they had sent. The crusade had been 10 years in the building, amassing and provisioning, and had been 5 that they had been fighting across the systems. Hard fighting. Unpredictable. The battles had been growing in their intensity as they moved closer and closer to the capital world, the home world of the Palace of Light. One family, just one, had dominated 24 worlds. Before the crusade was called, they had escalated their domination with each passing decade. They had to be stopped, for they were psychers, witches, ones of prodigious might. Sanctioned psychers aplenty had been sent against them, any of them, but had always gone down to the dust. Their influence could not be permitted to grow. A call had gone out to the closest Black Templars crusade, but no response had been received, the message probably not having reached them. So a localized crusade was called. The Navy had been all too happy to help, considering the resources lost to the encroachments by the Scourge. Planet by planet, the Guard cleansed their influence, destroying their proxies across every world. Proxies. Indigenous psychers the family then controlled, because they could manipulate them from afar. They killed some. A female on one planet, a young male on another. 2 were gotten in one place.
Watch the last
but each
church. I
time
have
it
not.
was grueling and costly.
Let's see.
Now, 5 years later, when the siege of the palace began, their main stronghold where at least 4 of these beings and their leader now lurked. If the general was honest, he had expected Astartes to thunder down on this impregnable fortress and kill everything within. But then, if the amassed fire that they had already used could not even dent the mystic shields that were erected, he supposed a drop pod strike would not be wise. The scything blasts of these witches, the white that scorched tanks and troops alike, would then fire out, decimating the armies around it in 1 minute. So they stood back, just outside of the range of the lightning from the skies, or the range that they had revealed so far.
It's also
The
Baltimore.
general had expected more than this, though, whatever this was.
Death Corps.
A wing of fighters played escort to one sole transport, and not a large one.
I like long.
The fighters were
I don't
there
mind
just to
long.
see if anything came out of the palace, but it did not, of course. The witches huddled in their cave. The second the transport stopped, the back doors opened, and a single rhino came out at speed. There was stunned silence from the staff as the murmur of, "That's all we get," threatened to rise and rise.
Yeah, let me see.
But the rhino, that ancient design of armored personnel carrier so well known, is a color that the general has seen once before in his entire life. Its sigils mark it out boldly to those few in the know. He took a deep breath and then allowed his comment to resound about the room.
There's a fan
That'll be
animated Horus Heresy.
More than enough. Prepare a frontal assault to follow that rhino. Sections 4 through 9 prepare to advance at the double. Stay very close if
Fluff
you
and
can.
Hammer podcast has it.
Comms
Here we
officer
go.
swung
Cool.
around and started
Do that.
to frantically vox the instructions out to the field officers. The second in command now loitered next to the general, looming in that way that meant he wanted answers, but would never ask the questions. The general turned to him and smiled a wide, toothy grin, one he smiled very rarely. Those freaks don't stand a chance now.
Cool, here we go. Here we go. Animated, cool. I might not be painting much. Oh. 1 second.
It is a cold night. I'm an old man. Please. Welcome to the Church of the Fulgur Lapis. Do you wish to join us tonight? I don't recognize you.
No, I don't expect you would. Nor would I expect us to be anyone besides you and I.
Well, this is a surprise. My midnight sermons are considered quite popular in these parts. You're sure?
Quite.
What a shame. I had not thought I had aged so poorly as to scare so many away.
It is rare to find a man like you with a sense of humor. I have found that most of your kind are dour, leaden-hearted men.
My kind?
Priests.
Then I fear you have only met the wrong kind. Besides, given the times we live in, any servants of the divine would find it extremely difficult to be of good cheer.
Very true.
I am Uriah Olothair, last priest of the Church of the Fulgur Labis. Might I have your name?
My name is unimportant. However, you may call me Apocalypsis.
An unusual name for one who professes a dislike of priests. You are aware of the significance of such a word?
I am. It is suiting for tonight, however.
And why exactly would that be? What revelations do you search for in my humble church?
I seek no revelation. I simply wish to talk to you. I wish to learn what keeps you here when the world is abandoning your beliefs in gods and divinity. I wish to understand why you have yet to turn to the faith of science and reason.
The great fresco of Isandula. A divine work. Wouldn't you agree?
It is quite magnificent, but divine? I don't think so.
Then you have not looked closely enough. Open your heart to its beauty, and you will feel the Spirit of God move within you.
And the whole world came running when the fresco was revealed, and the sight of it was enough to reduce all who saw it to stunned silence.
Ah, so you have read your Vastari.
So I have.
You are a student of art?
I have studied much. Art is indeed one of my interests.
Then you cannot argue that this work was not inspired by a higher power.
Of course I can. I do not seek to diminish the artist's sublime work through allocating praise upon a greater being. Her artistry does not prove the existence of anything. No god has ever created art.
In an earlier age, some might have considered such a sentiment blasphemy.
I have only ever seen mortal men accuse anyone of blasphemy, Uriah. I have only ever seen mortal men act upon it. Were reactions to the accusations any less violent, I would label it a victimless crime.
I just missed a lot there because I took a call.
Touché. But I have yet to see any scientist discover the root of
That's
inspiration.
all right.
The human mind is a wondrous thing. Do not be so quick to underestimate it. Tell me, Uriah, have you ever seen the great cliff sculptures of the Mariana Canyon?
No, though I have heard they are incredibly beautiful.
They are indeed 1,000-meter-high representations of their kings carved in stone that no weapon or drill can cut. They are at least as incredible as this fresco, worked into a cliff that had not seen sunlight in 10,000 years, yet carved by a godless people in a forgotten age. True art requires no divine rationale. It is just art.
You have your opinion, I have mine.
Isandula was a genius and a magnificent artist. That much is beyond question. But she still had to make a living, and even magnificent artists must take commissions where they are to be found. I am sure this work paid well, for the churches of her time were obscenely wealthy. Do you believe that she would be incapable of such a wondrous feat if she had been employed by a secular government?
She very well may have, but unfortunately we shall never know.
No, we won't. We are fickle creatures, Uriah. All too often I am tempted to believe that the invocation of the divine is a ploy by the jealous to dismiss one's accomplishments.
Jealousy?
Absolutely. To see another succeed where you may have failed is a sobering thing. Some would rather choose to remain ignorant of their limitations.
That is a very cynical view of humanity.
Forgive me. But I have seen too much darkness to be so innocent as to always assume good intentions. Do not mistake my intentions, however. Only in understanding our weakness may we find strength.
Well, this has been an interesting discussion, but you must excuse me, friend Apocalypsis. I have to prepare for my congregation.
No one is coming. It is just you and I.
Why are you really here?
This is the last church on Terra. History will soon be done with places like this, and I want a memory of it before it is gone.
If this is so, then come, friend, let us sit. I would rather not stand for whatever time remains. Your good health.
And yours. This is very good wine. It's old.
You have a fine appreciation of wine, friend Apocalypsis. My father gave this to me on my 15th birthday, and said I should drink it on my wedding night.
And you never married?
Never found anyone willing to put up with me. I was a devilish rogue back then.
No longer, it would seem. A devilish rogue turned priest. Sounds like quite the tale.
It is, but some wounds run deep, and it does no good to reopen them.
Fair enough.
Friend Apocalypsis, tell me, what did you mean when you said this place was soon to be gone?
Exactly what I said. Even in your isolated state, you must have heard of the Emperor and his crusade to stamp out religion and belief in the supernatural. Soon, he and his forces will arrive to tear this place down.
I know, but it makes no difference to me. I believe what I believe, and no amount of hectoring from some warmongering despot will sway me.
That is an obstinate point of view.
It is faith. It would seem I'm not as fickle as you would posit, eh?
Faith. A willing belief in the unbelievable without proof.
Faith's strength is just that. It requires no proof. Belief is enough.
That is why the Emperor wants rid of it, then. You call faith powerful. I call it dangerous. Think of what people in the grip of faith have done in the past. All the atrocities down the centuries that can be traced back to faith. Faith is both the causation and the justification for so much
So much
evil.
truth behind that. Oh, Pika, hey, how we doing? We are
Come here
listening
just to
to,
provoke me.
yep,
No longer a
Comrades
violent
got it.
man.
The Last
Such
Church.
a goal would be
a little bit
boring
of
and fruitless for the both of us.
pre-Horus Heresy
This is all you are
lore.
here for.
The
I
Last
suggest
Church.
You leave.
You are right, of course. I am being discourteous.
Sorry,
and
I got my head
apologize.
down,
I
just
came
trying to go to
learn of this
town
place,
here.
Not antagonize its guardian.
Trying to dirty up some wings.
Accept your apology, Apocalypsis. Do you wish to see the church?
I do.
Then come with me. The Fulgur Lapis.
So this is a holy stone?
It is, yes.
Why?
Why is it the Fulgur Lapis?
I mean, why is it holy? Was it deposited on the ground by your god? Was a man martyred here? Or did some young girl receive some sort of revelation while praying at its base?
Nothing so bland, rest assured, friend Apocalypsis. Thousands of years ago, a local holy man who was blind was walking in the hills hereabouts when a sudden storm came in over the Western Ocean. He hurried back down to the village below, but it was a long way, and the storm broke before he could reach safety. The holy man took shelter from the storm in the lee of this stone, at the height of the storm in the lee of the heavens. When he thought all was lost, he was lifted up and heard the voice of our Creator. And so he saw the stone wreathed in a blue fire, in which he saw the face of our Creator.
Did you not say he was blind?
Ah, he was blind no longer. The power of our Creator cured him of his affliction. He immediately ran back to the village and told the people there of the miracle.
And then?
The holy man returned to the Folga Lapis and instructed the townspeople to build a church around it. The story of his healing soon spread. Within but a few years, thousands were crossing the Silver Bridge to visit the shrine, for a spring had begun to flow from the base of the stone, and its waters were said to be imbued with healing properties.
And I wonder how much the priests benefited from it all. And what? It could cure diseases? Mend broken limbs?
So the church records say. This bathing chamber was constructed around the stone, and people across the land came to bathe in the sacred waters while they still flowed.
I have heard tales of a similar nature in the Far East. A young girl claimed to have seen a holy vision of a woman
Cool.
while
Pika
bathing
got some
near the
towels.
springs closest to
Very
her home.
nice.
She described a woman
Be fun
conspicuously
to paint,
similar
huh?
to the holy woman of a religious order of which her family was a member. Bathing houses were established there too, but for fear of diminishing the rate at which the owners of the bathhouses could admit pilgrims, the waters
A
were only
Legion
changed
player.
once a day.
Spaceship's more
The
your
dying
style.
and diseased came in droves,
I don't
passing
know.
through
I mean,
that water in the hundreds every day.
I just got this,
so I'm sure you can
and so
imagine
I was
what
just
a
like, cool, let
horrible
me paint
slop
it.
it was at the end.
Will I
They were
ever
but
use it?
pools of
I don't know.
blood, sloughed off skin, scabs, bits of cloth and bandage, an
Nice
abominable
pink color
soup
for
of
towels.
malady.
Nice, go for
The
it.
only miracle was that anyone emerged alive. Such a miracle was infrequent at best.
I cannot justify the actions of the greedy or the impure. I can assure you that did not happen here, if that is your concern.
Hematite from a banded ironstone formation, exposed by landslip during the storm, most likely. That would explain the strike. It seems to me that your holy man was not blinded by any physical defect, but was a result of hysteria or earlier mental trauma.
The
It is
Emperor's
not
kind of a
unheard
dick.
of to be cured in
Like,
such a manner.
Pre-Horse,
tempted
like,
to debunk
obviously,
the
I guess,
miracle this
you know,
church was
Thunder
founded
Warriors,
upon.
hearing about
It was
that.
our Creator's
Yeah,
will.
he's
And
Palpatine.
if
He
your
is
explanation
Emperor
were to substitute
Palpatine.
mine,
Emperor
the nature of the event is still
mankind,
what I
Emperor
would call a
Palpatine.
miracle. The Creator's face was seen. His voice was
Should
heard.
you do main pink and
It is a
white
malicious thing
accents,
to
or
seek to
main
destroy
white
another's
with
faith,
pink
Apocalypse.
accents, or
I
a
do not
50-50?
aim to be malicious. I am trying to explain how such a thing could have happened without the intervention of a godly
think
power.
pink
You think
with
that the way
white
we perceive the
accents
world
might
is the way it
actually go a
actually
little
is,
better.
but you cannot perceive
'Cause I'm
the
just trying to
external
think
world directly.
with-
Indeed, none of us can. Instead, we know only our
That's a
ideas
tough call.
or
That's a tough call.
interpretations of objects.
might
in the
have to-
world.
it's
The
one of those
human
things you
brain
might
is
have
a
to try too,
marvelous organ, priest,
and then go
it
with
is
it, and then
especially
repaint the one
adept
you didn't
at
like.
constructing images of faces and voices from limited information. Imagine your holy man sheltering from the storm in the cover of this great stone when the lightning bolt hit, the fire and the noise, the pounding surge of elemental energy. Isn't it possible that an already religious man might, in such circumstances, perceive sights and
Xenos player,
sounds of
screw the god
divine
emperor,
nature?
right?
We do it all the
Alright,
time.
perfect.
When you wake with dread in the dead of night, is that darkness in the corner not an intruder instead of just a shadow? The creak of a floorboard, the tread of a murderer?
I agree. The human mind is a powerful thing. What I value most, however, is the ability to reflect upon the past and reach conclusion that that tap against my window was a natural occurrence, and not a murderer come to kill a lonely priest.
Given the origins and evolution of religions in the human species, it seems a far more convincing and likely explanation that it was a figment of happenstance and a creative mind. A holy man might make a miracle of simple good fortune because of a predisposition to believe in the supernatural. Don't you agree?
No, I do not.
Really? You strike me as an intelligent man. Why can you not concede at least to the possibility of such an explanation?
Because I too have seen my God and heard his voice. Nothing can compare with knowing personally and completely that the divine exist.
Ah, personal experience. The most valued kind. Tell me, where did you receive this vision?
On a battlefield in the lands of the Frank, many, many years ago.
The Frank were brought into unity long ago.
For the greater
last
good,
battle
right?
was
Yeah.
fought nearly half a
Be
century
right back.
ago.
5 minutes. I'll
You
be
must
here.
have been a young man back then.
I was young and foolish. Young and foolish.
Hardly a prime candidate for divine intervention. But then I've found that the least likely to receive it are often the most in need of it. I have read your holy book before. To me, most of the men who appear on the pages are far from ideal role models. Perhaps I should not be so surprised. The devilish rogue sits with me today.
Your tone may be pleasant, but your spirit is nothing but adversarial. You say you wish to learn of me, and this church will come. Let us joust with words, thrusting and parrying one's certainties with argument and counter-argument. Say what you will, but come sunrise, you will leave and not return.
This is my intention. I have other matters to attend to, but tonight I have to talk with you. My adversarial spirit is not born from any mal-will towards you, Uriah. My malcontent is born from my love for humanity. I would see our species in an
Headphones
age
do
of
exist.
wonder, without these constant wars and the ignorance that blankets our kind like a plague. I would see us ascend. I would see all of our kind raised to the status of godhood that is worshipped throughout the galaxy. But we are enslaved to the fantastical notions that reside within that book of yours, and all the others like it. That damnable book in your hands is a curse, and I would see you rid of it.
You go so far as to mock my holy book too? This damnable book provides a code by which I have lived a peaceful life, in which I have built more than I have destroyed, helped more than hurt. My time before this book was nothing but destroying and hurting. Untold thousands more live similar lives thanks to the guidance provided by our willingness to believe in something greater than ourselves. Tell me, Apocalypsis, when we, as a species, find your vision to be a reality, what will become of us? What will unite us? Peace can only be attained through an aspiration or a common enemy. And when that aspiration disappears and we as a species are gods without rivals, who will we turn on? We will turn on each other, friend Apocalypsis. Your vision will bring only an eternity of war.
Wonder what they
When
think of
gods
their talk.
clash, galaxies burn.
Very
So
philosophical,
what
I
would
agree.
you have me say? There are more faiths
kinda
than
unexpected,
yours,
yeah.
Uriah, and each faith has equally zealous defenders.
But
How many generations?
maybe that's
of
why it's so
conflict
popular
until your
and everything,
message of
because it's
peace
so
turns
viable.
to
The
a
story, the
crusade against
lore,
those who do not share
everything
your
about it
beliefs.
is just
Where
backed
there
up.
are
They can back it
differences,
up with cool
humanity will find
stories.
them. And these differences are so fundamentally rooted in you as others' beliefs are in others. There can be no resolution without conflict.
You find nothing but exceptions to my arguments, never any rules by which to measure them.
How can I find rules in an inherently hypocritical system? Your book has been rewritten, translated, and twisted to fit the needs of hundreds of anonymous authors for hundreds of years. The faith is eternal, but the story and morals are not. One man hears his dead grandfather, and he is locked away in an asylum. But if he heard the voice of God, he would be venerated and might well become a saint. How is this a logical and rational system?
It is my faith. Respect my beliefs as I respect yours, despite your constant slights against my life's dedication.
Did you not say we should joust? Why does your faith require such protection? Is it not robust enough to withstand my questioning? No one else on this world enjoys such protection from scrutiny. So why should you and your faith be singled out for special treatment?
Why is it that faith is being targeted for destruction? Perhaps there is enough truth behind my words that the Emperor, in all his wisdom, fears their holy power. Or is it because there are people too obstinate to accept that there may be something that science cannot quite explain? I have seen my God. I saw his face and heard his words in my soul.
Do not expect me or anyone else to give your experience credence, Uriah, despite what you think you saw. You may believe it to be real, but just because you believe something to be true does not make it so.
I saw what I saw. I heard what I heard. That day on the fields of Frank has never lost its clarity. I relive it with every waking moment in which I am not occupied.
And where in Frank did this miraculous vision take place, priest?
On the killing field of Gadwere.
You were at Gadwere.
I was.
Will you tell me what happened?
I'll tell you what happened. But first, I need another drink.
Yeah, priests like to drink. Where we at?
No, friend Apocalypsis. This is the good stuff. I wouldn't deign to drink this from a tumbler.
So is Big E the
Now
guy
let me drink
that's
from a glass.
questioning him, telling him that the Emperor's coming, gonna be destroyed?
The water of life.
Finally, spirits both you and I can believe in.
Give it a minute, and let the vapors build. It intensifies the flavor. Swirl it a little. See the slicks on the side of the glass? They are called tears. And since they are long and descending slowly, we know the drink is strong and full-bodied.
And how long must we wait?
Patience, friend Apocalypsis. This wine has sat for many decades. It can sit for a few more minutes. Nose the drink. Feel the aromas and how they stimulate your senses. Allow yourself a moment. Let the sense awaken the memories of their origin.
May I ask a personal question while we wait?
Well, it depends on the question, doesn't it?
Why is it you carry a timepiece that doesn't function?
It is a family relic, you see. It has been with us since before even Old Night. No one knows when it broke, but as legend goes, it ticks before disaster strikes. I never believed it. Nor did my father. When I found it, however, it was a minute later than I always remembered it. Now it sits a minute from midnight. My father always jested that the day it struck midnight would be the beginning of the end. I've kept it for decades, never once seen it budge. I check it often, as if it could warn me of danger. Maybe there is hope, eh?
A grim portent. You seem to surround yourself with grim beliefs, Uriah.
Perhaps. But let's not ruin this good wine with such dour thoughts. My story has not yet even begun. We've waited long enough. Drink, friend Apocalypsis, generously. Hang on to the taste before it is gone.
Ah, that's a flavor I have not had in a long time. I didn't think any remained.
It is an old bottle, one I rescued from the ruins of my parents' home.
You make a habit of keeping old alcohol around.
Aye, a throwback to my wild youth. I was fond of the drink, a little too much even, if you take my meaning.
I do. Many a great man has been brought low by such an addiction.
You said you wanted to know of Gadwere?
If you are ready and willing to tell me of it, yes.
Willing, yes. Ready? Well, I suppose we will find out, eh?
Gadwere was a bloody day. It was hard on all who were there. I understand.
I may be old, and my eyes may not be what they once were, but I can still tell that you are far too young to know of Gadwere. You would not have even been born when that battle was fought.
Trust me, I know of Godwary.
I should tell you a little of myself first. Who I was back then, and how I came to find God on the battlefield of Godwary. If you have half a mind to hear it, anyway.
What is a story without its context? Of course. Say what you feel needs to be said.
I was born in the town below this church, nearly 80 years ago. The youngest son of the local lord. My clan had come through the final years of Old Night with much of their wealth intact. They owned all the lands around these parts, from this very mountain all the way to the mainland bridge. I wish I could say I was treated badly as a child, to give reason for why I turned out the way I did. I cannot. I was indulged and became something of a spoiled brat, given to drinking, carousing, and bouts of petulance. Looking back, I realize what a little shit I was. But of course, it's the lot of old men to look at themselves in their youth and realize too late all the mistakes they made and regrets they carry. Anyway, I decided in the adolescent fires of rebellion that I was going to travel the world and see whatever free corners of it remained in the wake of the Emperor's conquest. So much of the world had been brought under his sway, but I was determined to find one last patch of land that wasn't yet under the heel of his thunderbolt and lightning armies.
You make it sound like the Emperor was a tyrant. He ended the wars that were destroying the planet and defeated dozens of tyrants and despots. Without his armies, mankind would have descended into anarchy and destroyed itself within generations.
He still is a tyrant. Perhaps humanity would have been better off that way, rather than under the shadow of his accursed eagle. Maybe the universe decided we'd had our chance, that our time was up.
Nonsense. The universe cares not a whit for our actions or us. Our fate is wrought by our hands, and no others.
A philosophical point we will no doubt return to, but I was telling you of my youth.
But of course, please, continue.
Thank you. Well, after I announced my intention to travel the world, my father was good enough to grant me a generous stipend and a retinue of soldiers to protect me on my journeys. I left that very day and crossed the Silver Bridge 4 days later, traveling across a land recovering from war, which was growing fat on the labors decreed by the Emperor. Hammers beat out plates of armor, blackened factories churned out weapons, and entire towns of seamstresses created new uniforms for his armies. I crossed to Europa and cruised my way across the continent, seeing the eagle-stamped banner everywhere I went. In every town and city, I saw people giving thanks to the Emperor and his mighty thunder giants. But I'll be damned if any of it was genuine. It was like they were going through the motions, because they knew it was dangerous not to. I'd seen the thunder giants as a child, but never in the wake of a conquest. Never quite seen the reality of them before that point. I was drunk and whoring my way down the Tully Peninsula when I came across a garrison of the Emperor's super soldiers at a ruined cliff-top fortress. My damned romantic rebellious soul couldn't help but try and bait the giants. I called them many names. Freak, slave, the minor demons of a greater devil. I even told them the Emperor's only goal was to enslave all of the human race to his own towering ego. After having seen them battle in the fields of Frank, I shuddered to think of the fear I was in then. I thought I was being clever. In my own stupor, I convinced myself I was a hero. Looking back, I would never even have passed as a martyr. Eventually, one of the giants broke rank and approached me. I was monumentally drunk. I felt invincible as only a drunk and a fool could. This warrior was huge, far larger than any human I had ever seen. His entire body was encased in heavy, powered armor that enclosed his chest and arms. The sheer power of each soldier was never made clearer to me than when that giant came over to me and lifted me up, tearing my shirt and upsetting me greatly. I kicked at his armor and beat my fists into bloody pulps against his chest, but he just laughed at me. I screamed at him to let me go, and he did just that, telling me to shut my mouth before tossing me off the cliff.
Got the headphones, but no Wi-Fi. Well, you gotta do what you gotta do, Pika.
By the time I'd
I feel
climbed
like
the
you've
great steps
ran
back up
into
into the
this issue
village,
before.
they were gone. And I was left with just myself and a hatred greater than I had ever known. Stupid, really. I was asking for it, and it was only a matter of time until someone put me in my place.
And after Tali?
Here and there, I've forgotten a lot of those years, truth be told. I was drunk most of my waking hours. I know I took a sandskimmer across the Mediterranean wastes and traversed the wastelands of the Nord African conclaves that Shankal reduced to an ashen desert. All I found were settlements that were busy paying homage to the Emperor. So I carried onwards, far into the east, to see the ruins of Ursh and the fallen bastions of Narth and Doom. Even there, however, in places so far away as to be the most desolate and remote corners of the world, I still found those who gave thanks to the Emperor and his gene-engineered warriors. I couldn't understand it. Didn't these people know they just exchanged one tyrant for another? Then again, it wasn't their choice.
Humanity was on the brink of extinction. I cannot convey this point any more clearly. Without unity, and without the Emperor, there would be no human race. cannot
500
believe
Space
that you do
Marines
not
could wipe
see
out
that.
Earth even if
Oh, I
everybody
see it,
came
all right.
together
I see
and
that
would
very
prep
clearly.
and would be overkill.
The devilish rogue did not, however.
Let's see the kit
I was
bash.
young and full of the
Now we'll
fires
go
of youth and
to
see any form of control
Discord.
as oppression. Though they don't appreciate it, it is the function of the youth to push at the boundaries of the previous generation, to poke and prod and establish their own rules. I was no different from any other youth. Well, perhaps a little.
So you
Let's see
traveled
it.
the world and hadn't found any corner of it that hadn't sworn allegiance to the Emperor. Where did you go next?
I returned home for a spell, bearing gifts I'd mostly stolen, and then set off again. But this time I went out as a soldier of fortune instead of a tourist. I'd heard rumors of unrest in the land of the Frank, and fancied myself a renowned war hero. The Frank were a fractious people,
That's
even before
cool.
the days of Unity.
That's your
Never ones to
Tau
bow to
warrior.
invaders,
Was he not?
even the ones who posed as benign. Once I reached the
Are you gonna
continent,
put a
I
head
heard
on
of
him,
Havelek de Grasse and the
Let's
Battle of
see.
Alroy.
or you decided to give him
Straight
a?
for the town.
Avalroy, a town
Scroll
poisoned
up.
by the bitterness of a madman whose meager skill fell far short of his ambition.
Now that much is obvious. Back then, the story was that Havelek was found wrongly
Yeah.
accused of the brutal murder of the woman the Emperor
looking
appointed
at
as governor. He was set to be shot by
That's
a
pretty
firing
fun.
squad,
Fun to
but his
do.
brothers and friends
Looks
attacked
good.
the local army units running the execution. The soldiers were torn to shreds, and the death of a few locals in the fighting turned a small-scale riot into open rebellion. It got ugly faster than the town had time to think what they were doing. But by then, it was too late. Unfortunately for everyone, Havelek was a gifted orator, and fanned the flames of the townfolk's ire at the Emperor's rule. Within the hour, a hastily formed militia had stormed the local army headquarters and seized the weapons within. None of the soldiers survived.
You are aware that Havulik did assault and murder the woman.
I learned that later, yes. By then it was far too late to do anything about it. By the time I reached Avalroy, full of piss and vinegar for the coming fight, Havelek had rallied a number of the local townships to his cause and amassed quite an army. It was magnificent, friend Apocalypsis, for it had been everything I had so desperately searched for. Icons of the Emperor being torn down, colourful buntings hanging from every window, bands playing in the streets constantly while Havelek and all of us, his soldiers, marched up and down the town. I swear it felt like we were an army of devilish, daring youths. We should have been training. We should have prepared. But our courage was buoyed up by the festivities, and more towns rose up against the Emperor's rule by the day.
Swap the head out for the
Within a
helmet.
week, we had amassed
Cool,
an army
cool.
of nearly 40,000 strong.
Okay.
Truly, it seemed, I had found
And
my
then what you could do
glorious
for your
rebellion
Space
I so
Marine is have that
desperately
head
craved.
on
It was
the
heroic
base.
and courageous and dangerous, and it spoke to my romanticism for the heroic freedom fighter
Fur blade.
We were absolutely sure that
Cool,
we
man.
would be the
Very cool.
spark that would light the fires of rebellion all across the world, and see the autocrat tumbled from his self-imposed rule. Then we heard that the Thunderbolt and Lightning armies were marching from the east, and we set off in grand procession, making all due haste. Havelek leading us from Averoy was a joyous day. I'll never forget it. The laughter, the kisses from the girls, and the spirit of our shared brotherhood carried us off as we marched to battle. In but a week of marching, we reached Gadwere and set up our defenses atop a line of hills directly in the path of our enemies. We had all thought ourselves tactical geniuses, holding this strategically advantageous position. Had we any training and discipline,
Cut it
might have
up,
made
put
a
it on a
difference.
flayed one. Yeah.
We held the
there
high
you go.
ground, and both of our flanks were anchored on strong positions. On the left were the ruins of the Ganduere bastion. On the right,
I have so
desolate
many like
marshes
extra
through which nothing
Necron
could
faces
pass.
that I want to like pile
You
them
must
up on
have
the
known
base of
it
like
was madness
one of my
to engage the
characters.
Emperor's armies. I mean, you had
Maybe
no
my
hope of
Adeptus
defeating them.
Sororita
His warriors were
Palatine,
bred
I
for
might
battle
put it on.
and spent every waking moment in combat training.
Put it on her
Perhaps
base.
we knew. Maybe we didn't want to think about it. We were so full of hope, of optimism, we wouldn't allow ourselves to even consider defeat. When the Emperor's armies came into sight, we were nearly 50,000 strong, and we faced an army estimated at a mere 5,000. It was hard not to feel that we could win the day, especially with Havelek riding up and down and firing our blood. His brother tried to calm him, but it was far too late. Eventually, maybe a kilometer from our position, the Giants halted their advance. We should have waited too. Instead of letting the spirit of the moment die, we charged down the hillside like mad, glorious fools, screaming war cries and waving swords, pistols, and rifles over our heads. It was maybe 6 or 7 ranks deep, and we only covered half the distance before the Giants shouldered their weapons and opened fire.
Shit.
My God, the noise. I'll never forget it. The first volley was thunder that ripped down the line, and our first 5 ranks were cut down to a man before they could even scream. Each of their bullets was a small bomb that ripped limbs from bodies and burst men open from the inside like wet sacks. I turned to shout, and was struck in the back of the head and fell forward into the ruptured body
Hey,
of another
Goose.
man. Rolling over,
Why
I
do you
felt the
hear
back of my head
booing?
and realized I had
I
been
don't
hit.
know. It's
Shrapnel
the
or
last
some
church.
fragment, I
Little
think.
Warhammer lore here.
I could feel myself losing blood, weakening by the moment. Now the initial shock in the first few
Suggested by
seconds had passed.
Comrade.
The screaming began. The charge had ground to a halt, and now the men and women were milling around in confusion and fear. As the reality finally dawned on them, and they understood the magnitude of what Havelek had done. Now, the Thunder Warriors took their turn to charge. They broke into a run, and terror trembled beneath their feet. Most of those who had fallen but survived
I think it is a
were
fan-made
crushed
thing,
beneath
yep.
the giant
Yeah, Goose.
They all were unsheathing their swords with serrated edges and motorized blades.
I'm digging it. It's pretty fucked, but
A roar out of a nightmare.
I like it.
We had been defeated in the opening volley, but these warriors were without mercy. Havelek had somehow survived the initial barrage with only superficial wounds. And as I lay on my back dying, I watched him stare, dumbfounded, as the leading Thunder Warrior cleaved him in two with a single swing of his chain blade. Looking back at Havelek's army, I saw my terror mirrored on the face of every man and woman left, who were all begging for mercy,
Fucking
throwing
chainsword.
down their weapons, trying to surrender, but the slaughter continued, heedless of their perils. They marched right up to them and hacked into them without mercy. All those people were cut apart so quickly.
This is good.
Brutalized
This
with
is
such
good
economy of
fan-made
force,
film.
I couldn't believe so many people could
Animation.
die in so short a time. It
Got
was
the
not glorious
sound.
battle I dreamed of. It was mechanized butchery.
Good voices.
If I could have ran, I would have. And I'm not ashamed to say I laid there weeping, listening to the awful sound of people dying, and the wet sound of flesh being shorn from bodies, and the stench of voided bowels and open bellies, until the mercy of darkness overcame me. When I woke, surprised I'd still lived, it was dark. In the distance, I heard the victory chants of the Thunder Warriors drifting across the fields, along with the smoke of
The
victory
Thunder
pyres.
Warriors, there they are.
Havelek's army had been destroyed. Not routed, not put to flight. Destroyed. In less than an hour, 50,000 men and women had been killed. I never learned of any other survivors. Weak, and laying in a field of human parts, I began to weep once more. I was in agony, bleeding to death and thinking how absolutely pointless my
It's
life
animated,
had been.
yep. It's kind of like comic book type
Heartache and
style
ruin I
animation,
visited upon others,
panels,
reckless pursuit
which
of hedonism and
storyboarding
self-interest.
kind of in a way.
I
Recreated it in real life
my
for the
family.
sounds.
And myself.
Maybe.
That was when I realized I wasn't alone.
Yeah, so Goose, Comrade turned me on to Thunder Warriors. We listened
was
to
with
that
you?
lore.
The power of the divine.
And
I opened my eyes and saw a golden
yep,
face
and
above me.
they are
A face of such radiance
pre-Astartes.
and perfection that my tears were no longer shed for my self-pity.
That was
but
some
for
Matrix
his.
stuff.
The light radiated from the figure, and I averted my eyes for fear I'd be blinded. I had been in pain, yes, but now that pain was gone, and I knew I was seeing the face of the divine. I could not describe that face to you, not with all the poetic imagery in the world at my disposal, but it was the most exquisite thing I had ever seen. I felt myself
They
lifted
did.
up and thought this was the end, and then the face spoke. and I
Where we
knew
were
I was destined
comparing
to
it to
live.
Order 66.
What did this face say to you?
Why do you deny me? Accept me, and you will know that I am the only truth and the only way.
Did you reply?
I know, it was
couldn't.
pretty sad.
To utter any
Pretty
words would have been
sad.
base. In any case, my tongue was quite stilled by the awesome vision of God.
Kinda, right? I mean, it's
What
a
made
good
you think
comparison.
It was God? You were a dying man on a battlefield, surrounded
for
by your
sure.
dead comrades, and you were having an epiphany about the futility of the life you had led. Think back, priest. Surely there is another explanation?
I need no other explanation. You may be wise in many things, Apocalypsis, but you cannot know what goes on in my own mind. I heard the voice of God and saw his face. Does the perception of events truly matter if the results are singular? I was borne up and set into a deep slumber, and when I awoke, my wounds were healed. A piece of bone had been embedded in my skull, nearly a centimeter away from severing my spinal cord. When I rose, I searched for fellow survivors. I was alone. I decided to return to the land of my birth, but when I returned, I found my family home in ruins. The townsfolk told me Scandian raiders from the north had come to plunder my family's wealth. So they killed my brother and tortured my parents and sisters in an attempt to make my father give up the family treasures. My father had a weak heart and died before they could learn his secrets. I found my home in ruins, and my family as bleached cadavers. There were no amends to be made at home. All I had to remember them by was their wealth, good wine, and this damned watch.
I am sorrowed by your loss, Uriah. If it is any consolation, the Scandians would not accept unity and were wiped out near 3
So what would have
decades ago.
happened if it just if
I
it
know,
was just Thunder
but I do
Warriors
not revel
and
in
Astartes
death
fighting
anymore.
together and Thunder Warriors
The men who
seconding
killed my
Primarchs,
family will have been judged by God, and that is justice enough for me.
helping?
That
right?
is noble of you.
I took those few keepsakes from the ruins and made my way to the
That is a
nearest
big what if,
settlement,
you know?
thinking I'd get blind drunk and try to figure out
What if
what
they
to
weren't
do with my
betrayed?
life.
What if they
Halfway
could
there, I met an old
still
priest in
be
need of help, in desperate
valued?
search of the next caretaker of the Folga Lapis. I knew I had found my purpose. I had spent my entire life until then living for myself, but when I saw the spire of that church, I knew that God had a purpose for me. I should have died at Gaduere, but I was saved for a reason.
And what was the reason?
To serve God, to bring his words to the people, to do good where others would not, to be a beacon in the coming dark.
And And that's what you've been doing here?
That is what I've been trying to do, but the Emperor's promulgators traverse the globe with his message of denouncing the supernatural and criminalizing the devout. I assume that is why you are here, and why none of my congregation have come here tonight.
You would be correct. In a manner of speaking, I have come to try and convince you of the error of your ways. To learn of you and to show you that there is no need for any divine powers to guide humanity. This is the last church on Terra, and it falls to me to offer you this chance to embrace the new way willingly.
Or?
There is no or, my dear priest. Come, let us go back out into the church as we talk. I want to teach you of all that belief in gods has done for humanity down the ages. The bloodshed, the horror, and the persecution. I will tell you of this, and you will see how damaging such belief is.
And then, you will go on your way, friend Apocalypsis?
It is my sincerest hope that we will go together. You know of gene breeding?
Aye. Very little is not gene-bred these days.
And you have heard of the once great city of Zoser in the Nordafric conclaves?
Yes, I have been to Zoser. At least I saw what my guide told me were its ruins.
True. Not much is left. Anyway, the scientists of Zoser sought to end a great famine that was sweeping the Nordafric conclaves through gene-breeding animals that would grow more quickly and more easily in their harsh climate. When one of the local cults caught wind of the gene breeding, they saw it as an affront to their god. They were very much against the modification of genetics because they thought that their god had designed them as they were, and it was a sin to meddle in such things. This cult, the Zoserites, saw the lead scientist, an Apashtar, as the next embodiment of evil, seeking to defile all the people by feeding them the embodiment of sin. They went on a rampage, stabbing and clubbing any Apashtar they could find. Of course, the Apashtar retaliated, and rioting spread throughout the city and left close to 1,000 people dead. They did not again try to gene breed new farm stock, and untold thousands more died to the famine.
Is there a point to that story?
Absolutely. It typifies religion and tells a universal tale of religious behavior that has been reoccurring since the beginning of human history. Religion actively impedes forward progress by producing stubborn people who fear advancement.
A far-fetched example, friend Apocalypsis. One freakish story cannot serve as proof of theory that all belief in the divine is a bad thing. Why don't you tell the story of the time a church organized a program to help the poor and the sick and the dying? Why do you not tell a story of when faith and religion gave a community the strength to stick together and help each other through Old Night? Through faith comes character, and through our character there is moral strength. Without such guidance, the world would descend into anarchy.
A secular government with strict laws and programs could accomplish all that you have listed without creating stubbornness or creating a dependability on a church that would impose further taxes upon the poor and make waste of otherwise productive time. The idea that the church is a moral compass just isn't true. Where the church is strong, it causes cruelty. Intense belief produces intense hostility. Only when faith loses its force can a society hope to become humane and progress.
I don't believe that. My holy book gives instructions on how to live a good life. It has lessons humanity needs. I have benefited greatly, as have the people in the town below.
Are you sure? I have read your holy book, and much of it is bloody and vengeful. I suspect an outside spectator would view the people on those pages not as exemplars of proper behavior, but terrifying examples of corrupt morals.
I think 40K is all dark and gory.
Much of the text
and
is not
evil,
meant
right?
to be taken literally.
Right? I don't think anything's typically nice.
That is exactly my point. You priests pick and choose which bits of your book to take literally and which to read as symbolic. And that is a personal matter, not a divine one. You may be pure and noble, Uriah, but all too often a priest is a man who is cruel and purely seeking personal gain. Religion has no place in a fair and just society. In ages past, a frightening number of people took these holy books absolutely literally, sowing untold misery and death because they truly believed the words they read. The history of religion is a horror story, Uriah, and if you doubt it, look to the past and see what humanity has done in the name of their gods over the millennia. In ancient times, ritual sacrifices were commonplace. To appease their vile gods, priests drowned women and children in sacred wells and cut the heart out of their slaves and prisoners. They would drive a pile through a maiden's body to pacify a non-existent creature.
You cannot seriously compare my religion to such barbarism. You describe ignorant savagery, not religion as I would name it.
Can't I? It was never uncommon for religions founded in this region of the world to use their faith to justify conquest without mercy. The rich desired more power, but the peasantry would not fight for their kings and their lords just to further the interest of those who ruled them so cruelly. The lords knew this. They guised their political objectives with religious significance by the just and marvelous judgment of God, and the people fought fervently for a cause with no merit. Extremism bred extremism, and the retaliation was swift. Now that war had been initiated on religious pretexts, the conflicts escalated, and the battling continued, until little was left but fields littered with the bones of the foolish and the deceived. But sorrow or remorse was never tolerated for such a thing, as the crusade was God's will, after all.
This is ancient history. As you say, the nobles were bent on furthering their own interests. They used religion as an excuse, but in their greed they would have committed these atrocities one way or another. You cannot vouchsafe the truth of events so lost in the mists of time.
I would agree with you, had they not repeated the act nearly a century later. Warriors laid siege to the Sex stronghold in ancient France, and when the city fell, the generals asked their leader how they might tell the faithful from the traitors among the captives. The leader, who followed his God, ordered the warriors to kill them all. God will know his own. 20,000 men, women, and children were lost to faith that day. Of course, for fear that any may escape, an organization was given absolute power over the people, with its sole purpose to hunt down those who ran. They brought about hysteria and tortured any they so pleased. They did not stop once all their enemies were hunted down and killed either. They too had convinced themselves of their holiness. They exterminated whole towns on the merest suspicion of witchcraft or treachery. When it was all said and done, near 100,000 were dead. Most of them were innocent.
If you'll allow me, I shall turn your logic back upon you, Apocalypsis. Had it been a secular government that decided they required more land and riches, do you truly believe they would have decided against it for no reason other than that there was no divine justification? Look back upon your great knowledge of history. Do you truly not recall any secular government that drove itself mad with suspicion of treachery, and created a state ruled by surveillance and torture? You chop apart history, take what you so desire, and insist I behold the bloody remains. Humans are flawed, and religion is more often a convenient scapegoat than a corrupting force.
If you believe that, then you have been shut away in this church for far too long, priest. All the dictators deposed through unification were mass-murdering ethnarchs who killed millions in their constant warring, burning away all hope of progress. Cardinal Tang's pogroms and death camps saw millions dead in the Indonesia bloc. He died but 30 years ago and claimed His entire life had been served in the name of a greater power.
You fixate on the blood and death and forget all the good that can be achieved through faith.
Uriah, you only see religion for what it can be. I am seeing it for what it most always is. Savagery pervades our world, and it is sustained by ignorance and crude belief. It is true that before the descent of Old Night, religion had lost its power over the people. But like the worst kind of poison, it lingered and fostered division amongst those who endured. Without belief, divisions blur over generations. New generations mingle, intermarry, and forget ancient wounds. It is only belief in gods and divine entities that keep them alien to one another. And anything that divides people breeds inhumanity and cruelty. Religion is the canker in mankind's heart that serves such an ugly purpose.
I have heard all that you have had to say, friend Apocalypsis, and I have finally heard enough. Yes, people have done terrible things to one another in the name of their gods, but they have done terrible things regardless of the course of their beliefs. An acceptance of gods and an afterlife is a vital part of what makes us who we are. If you take that away from humanity, what do you suggest takes its place? In my many years as a priest, I have ministered to many dying people, and the emotional benefit of religion's power to console the wounded and the dying, as well as those left behind, cannot be underestimated.
There is a flaw in your logic, priest. Religion's power to console gives it no credence or validity. It might be a comfort to a dying man to believe that he will go to some bountiful paradise of endless joy. But even if he dies with a wonderful smile on his face, it means nothing in the grand scheme of things. Better that less would die due to the removal of religion than each zealot die with a smile on their face.
Maybe, but when my time comes, I will die with God's name on my lips.
Are you afraid to die, Uriah?
No.
Truly?
Truly. I have my share of sins, but I have spent the greater part of my life in the service of my God, and I believe I have served him faithfully.
So why is it that when you go to these people who are dying and clinging to their beliefs that they don't welcome the end of their life? Surely the gathered family and friends should be of good cheer and celebrate their relatives' passing. After all, if eternal paradise awaits us, why are they not filled with gleeful anticipation? Could it be that in their heart of hearts they don't really believe it?
Are you ever excited to have a loved one move on or leave in search of something greater? Are you ever excited to leave your family and friends in search of a better life? Even if it is for the best, are you delighted to leave all that you know to be thrust into the unknown? No one is. Life is a gift, and our chance to make ourselves into someone before our time in the afterlife. Who would give that up willingly? If you cannot see that plainly, then you are a fool. The Lord of mankind is the light in the way, and all his actions are for the benefit of mankind, which is his people. So it is taught in the holy words of our order, and above all
There
things
is
that God
no
will
one to
protect.
hear you.
I don't care what you say anymore. You have come here to do what you feel you need to do, and I'll not buttress your ego and self-righteousness by playing along any longer. You listen to my words, but hear nothing. End the charade.
As you wish. No more games.
Ah. You.
Now do you understand the futility of what you do here?
You are the Emperor.
I am. It is time to go.
Uh-oh. didn't, maybe I
Go where?
thought of that?
There is nowhere else for me in this godless world of yours.
Of course there is. Embrace the new way and be part of something incredible. A world and a time where we stand on the brink of achieving everything we ever dreamed. Verona's work was never meant for darkness. Only in the light can it achieve its full potential. Humanity is the same. And only when the suffocating shadows of a religion that teaches us not to question is gone from this world will we see its true, radiating brilliance.
I will miss this place.
In time, I will build an imperium of such grandeur and magnificence that this will seem like a pauper's hovel. Now, let us be on our way.
Oh, and it burns. They're torching it right now.
How can you do this? You say you stand for reason and the advancement of understanding, but here you are destroying a repository of knowledge.
Some things are best forgotten.
And I hope you have foreseen the consequences of a world bereft of religion.
I have. It is my dream. An imperium of man that exists without recourse to gods and the supernatural. A united galaxy with Terra at its heart.
A united galaxy?
Indeed. Soon enough, unity will be achieved on Terra. It is time to reclaim humanity's lost empire among the stars.
With you at its head, I presume.
Of course. Nothing of such grand scale can be achieved without a singular vision at its heart. Least of all, the reconquest of the galaxy. There is a place for you at my side, Uriah. You are noble and your heart is true. We have need of iterators who would spread my imperial truth across the stars to all those planets without guidance.
I can submit to no imperial truth. My entire life has been altered by, at best, a misunderstanding. At worst, my life has been spent following a lie. But you know what? It doesn't matter that my life has been one massive falsehood. I came here with my heart open and emptied by grief. The spirit of my god had entered my soul and filled me with love. My devotion was my salvation, and I have spread a doctrine of love and forgiveness. No amount of words and tricks may change that. Even now, despite this revelation, my heart is filled with love. There is no resentment in my heart. What makes faith so powerful, Emperor, is that it requires no proof. Belief is enough.
I feared such a thing. I wish you would join my great crusade, Uriah. Soon I shall expand my imperium to the furthest corners of the galaxy. With all my sons beside me, I need men like you. You make a virtue of commitment and purity.
Did you not just speak to me of the horror of the Crusades? And what evil men do in the name of purity? You are no better than the holy men you were telling me about.
The difference is that I know I am right, Uriah.
Spoken like a true autocrat.
You misunderstand, Uriah. I have seen the narrow path that humanity must walk to survive. This is how we must begin.
It is a dangerous road you travel. To deny humanity a thing will only make them crave it more. I see no reality in which your goals do not lead us to disaster and ruin. Beware your subjects do not begin to see you as a god. I truly hope, in the name of all that is divine,
The hypocrisy that the Emperor is the one
I
to
dread
save the
the future
priest.
you forge.
I wish only the best for my people.
I believe you, Apocalypsis. But I cannot be a part of it.
back to the church and it burned all around him. Ooh. Or maybe not. What happened to the sound? Oh, it's there. Good story. Yeah. Good suggestion. Alright. Let's see. Let's listen to a Tau story for Pika. Let's see. I gotta go to where am I? Baltimore's Guide. And we'll go to playlists. He's always got stuff that's in there. Timelines, Imperial Guard, Necrons, Chaos, Aldari lore, Tau. Here we go. Full playlist. Yes, comrade, the fish people. Tau lore. Let's go for the Greater Good. Full lore part 1. Pika, I'm on YouTube, and there is a channel, Baltimore's Guide to Warhammer, and tons of videos he's done, and great narration, great storytelling, good library, very good library. Let's see if I can, I'll post a link. Let me copy that. They're not fish. They have hooves. They do have hooves, I think I heard. Why won't it copy? Control P? Control V? Yeah, Control V. There we go. This is the Tau playlist. But I'm going to start with
Realtor.com
for the greater
makes
good.
looking
Actually, I'm
for
going to
a
start
house
with
exceptionally easy.
Go to Realtor.com or download the
an advertisement. They got hooves, right? Okay. Tau look really cool too. I like the mechs.
To our young,
type
it is
things.
surprising that the other races of the galaxy do not always join
I'm going to go to
us.
the bathroom real
The
quick. Let me check.
Shassal point to our
Let me
great
know if the
victories,
volume's alright.
peerless weaponry, and undefeatable strategies. Our future pilots praise our fleets that pierce the stars and spread knowledge, wisdom, and peace. The young poor speak in mesmerizing tones of the undeniable success experienced by all of our partners, from Kroot to Vespid, Greet to Nikasa. The apprentices of the Earthcast look upon our race's wondrous creations in every field of architecture, mathematics, science, logic, and engineering. How, they ask, could anyone deny us? We have learned, at great cost, that our enemies do not consider these facts. Their minds are clouded by false ideologies that have been failing them for longer than our race has even existed, or they are driven only by base hungers and passions. They see not that the Tau Va raises us above such pettiness, nor sadly do many care. Ethereal Aunlan, in his ineffable wisdom, recognized that no gift is more precious than that of knowing one's place in the universe, and that living and dying for enlightenment and reason are the greatest of all purposes. All of this gives immense freedoms. We Tau all instinctively acknowledge the truth of his words. We all instinctively perceive that sometimes the parent must appear cruel to the child in order for them to learn what is right and be strengthened for the future. We all instinctively comprehend that the ignorant must be guided by the enlightened. and the progress cannot be halted for the benefit of the close-minded. There is a greater good. The greater good is higher than any of us or any other cause. It is what we live, strive, and die for. It is the galaxy's destiny, though it is with sadness that I admit that not all accept it. It is our humble duty to make it reality for all, whether they know they need it or not. No deed in the Talvar proliferation is an unworthy one. No sacrifice in its dissemination is in vain. We will topple false ideologies, make war into peace, let sadness become joy, and turn ignorance to cognizance. For the greater good. Chasse au Chassira, Commander Shadow Sun. Psychic Awakening, the greater good. The Tau Empire's Fifth Sphere expansion has begun in earnest. Reunited with the surviving heroes of the Fourth Sphere, the Tau work to fulfill their destiny and bring ever more worlds and peoples into the fold of the greater good. These populations may be ignorant of the greatness that could be theirs, but they will be taught. Beset on many sides by dead space or formidable alien empires, many years ago the Tau sought to circumnavigate these obstacles in their quest to unite the galaxy under the greater good. They envisaged this Fourth Sphere expansion as the greatest of its kind in their history, but it failed, apparently lost with all hands in a technological disaster. Only years later were survivors discovered, and Commander Shadow Sun took leadership of the Fifth Sphere expansion to reunite the Tau Empire with its lost kin. Powering through the Startide Nexus wormhole, Shadow Sun's fleet emerged at the Nimya Atoll, in a region known to the Imperium as the Chalnath Expanse. Period of intense colonization culminated in a ferocious battle against the Death Guard, but the Tau secured victory, and they are now prepared to strike out again. Humanity's beleaguered soldiery in the Chalnath Expanse stand against foe after foe, even with their skies scarred by the Great Rift. Holding on to their faith in the Emperor with all their might, they fight to quell rebellions and uprisings as well as Xenos invasion. Even an armed force as insidious as the Gene Stealer cults cannot count on their complex plans to unfold without difficulty. They are not alone in wanting domination over the planet they call home. Other races and ideologies have designs upon it, not least the Tau and their greater good. The Gene Stealer cults are tenacious and devious, and their claws are dug deep into the Chalnath Expanse. They will do what it takes to keep competitors away from their territory, spilling as much blood as possible. The Fifth Sphere expansion. When a returning recon probe proved that some of the Fourth Sphere's Taus still lived, the Fifth Sphere expansion was founded to reunite the survivors with the Empire. Beyond the Startide Nexus, they met with strange findings and foul foes. Barely a quarter of the Fourth Sphere fleet had escaped the hellish sub-realm that they had been pitched into by the mass failure of their ship's AL-38 slipstream modules. Countless colonists were slain by murderous and sadistic creatures dwelling there that defied all Tau understanding of the universe. Given the horror that they had endured, most of the survivors could barely speak of how they escaped. It surprised many of the Fifth Sphere Tau that what discomforted their lost kin more than anything else was the presence of non-Tau species in the Fifth Sphere fleet. The Fourth Sphere's own auxiliaries could not be found, with only dark theories circulating as to why. Despite the many questions that still hung ominously in the air, Shadowstun wasted little time in progressing the Fifth Sphere expansion. The Nemya Atoll was wild and contested by myriad races. Piratical orc fleets terrorized the Fulnar Nebula in the east, and scattered Tyranid tendrils roamed hungrily. Several Imperial worlds were swept up quickly by Shadowsun's forces, having been left vulnerable and isolated by the Devourer of Hope, known to humans as the Great Rift. The Fourth Sphere Tau relished war against these humans, carrying out acts of incredible barbarity, such as the slaughter at Salkayo, the Phi Leal Station bloodshed, and many others that haunted Shadow Sun and the Ethereal High Council. Such were these atrocities that many commanders of the Fourth Sphere were subjected to the ritual punishment of Malk La. Despite their hindrances, a multitude of colonies were established. Only months after the miraculous reunification with the Fourth Sphere survivors, the Nemya Atoll came under attack. Without warning, an immense armada of ships resembling hideously changed Imperial vessels broke into real space before the Startide Nexus itself, disgorging torrents of ordnance and boarding torpedoes. The Nexus's defense platforms were buffeted by shots that corroded their crisp armored hull in the blink of an eye. Boarded defenders found themselves under attack from enemies that resembled space marines, but with bodies grotesquely degenerated and beset by foul plagues. Many wielded huge scythes that could cut a crisis battlesuit in twain, or carried weapons that spewed gouts of toxic slime. Despite their hideous deformities, they were terrifyingly resilient, shrugging off withering weapons fire with impunity. For all the surprise of the attack, the Tau forces were highly disciplined, and the defense fleets responded with laudable speed. A great many of the invading ships were destroyed in salvos of heavy fire, but they were remarkably durable. Like the hulking abominations that crewed them, and large numbers more survived. They disgorged thousands of warriors from their heavy bulks, who descended upon stellar fortifications and ships with incredible ferocity, spreading their filth with joyous abandon. Broken reports spoke of the Tau themselves being infected by the invaders' disgusting contagions. None could explain how the Tau could be affected by Guayla diseases, and yet they were. Some orbital stations were so ravaged that their captain's last act before succumbing to illness were to set their stations to self-destruct, lest what they suffered spread to others. When Shadowsun learned of the assault, she responded without hesitation. Correlating data from battles on Kelik and Kalendula, Shadowsun identified the attackers as the Death Guard. The Nexus could not fall to these monsters. The Death Guard could not be allowed to enter it and attack the main Tau Empire. Upon arrival at the Nexus, Shadowsun's fleet broke down into small battle groups, each with dedicated targets and responsibilities. Some relieved beleaguered defense stations, while others engaged the Death Guard fleet head-on. Every action was part of detailed, overlapping plans to present so many targets to the Death Guard that their fleet would fracture. Battle groups taunted and baited, retreating then striking again. So this continued. But the casualties mounted at an enormous rate. Though the number of putrid Death Guard wrecks began to grow, it was not enough to stop them. Scores of vessels still made to enter the Nexus. In a rare moment of doubt, Shadowsun considered that it might not be possible to win, and ordered for the Empire to be warned. In a blaze of light, an advanced prototype messenger drone sped from Shadowsun's command ship past the Death Guard fleet and into the Startide Nexus. As some of the Death Guard ships burrowed into their Nexus, those left behind suddenly withdrew from battle, their pestilential hulls absorbing terrific punishment as they made for a warp jump point. Vengeful Tau destroyed some, but a great many escaped, peeling away from the fields of fetid wrecks like a bandage drawn back from a still-seeping wound. On the other side of the Nexus in the Zone of Silence, the Starstride defense fleets waited with bated breath. Reinforcements had been pulled in from across the Empire following the warning carried by the drone. But nothing happened. No foul plague ships emerged from the Nexus. For months the Tau operated at the highest level of readiness, but there was nothing. The waiting was almost worse than battle. Such was the tension. At any point, horrific forces could appear and submerge the Zone of Silence in a deluge of virulence. To what end the Death Guard's destructive attack had been launched, theories abounded. Tau strategists had no way of knowing whether this end had even been achieved. All agreed the threat persisted. The Nexus's permanent defenses were increased, and battlefield data was scrutinized for answers. The Chalnath Expanse, home to the Nemya Atoll, was riven by conflict. Tau fleets discovered Imperial worlds in the grip of civil war and mass civilian uprisings. Bringing the systems of this region into the greater good would require immense resolve and discipline. Shadowsun was confident that her warriors were capable. The humans of the Chalnath Expanse had been beset by disaster after disaster. First, the emergence of the Great Rift, accompanied by Tau overtures and invasions, and secondly, the Gene-Stealer cult uprisings. Instances of mutation and seditious witchery increased, and governors and ruling councils bickered over which of these blights were causes and which were symptoms as they fought to retain control. Not one system avoided conflict. Shadow Sun herself attacked Astorgius in the Thaxaril system. The Ctesippus and Arijan systems were not directly assaulted by Tau forces. They were subject to Genestealer cult uprising so successful that more than half of their key worlds fell in a matter of months. Those few that remained loyal held on by a thread, their enduring faith in the Emperor all that gave them strength. The defenders of Hairfoss were embroiled in an intense guerrilla war with Xenos cultists, complicated by murderous Tau infiltrations and their duplicitous diplomats. The Ryatov system became an inferno of bloodshed between the Tau, Astra Militarum and Genestealer cultists. The inhabitants of Vorothian in the Barolier system counted themselves fortunate for some time before cursing their luck when the first forays of Tau encroachment triggered a mass uprising from long-forgotten parts of the Underhive in their capital. The Tau's core strategy remained the same as with any sphere of expansion. The disenfranchised human populations were wooed with tales of the wonder of the greater good. Insurrectionist cells were cultivated and ambitious leaders supported. Still, the Tau never expected to contend with the Genestealer cults. When battlefield data was accumulated and autopsies were carried out on the corpses of strangely mutated humans, the horrible truth was revealed. They discovered monstrous hybrids of human and Tyranid genetic strands. Debate raged among the Earth caste as to how this was possible, but all agreed that these creatures had to be destroyed with extreme prejudice. The Tau were quick to take advantage of the pandemonium of the wars already raging between Imperial forces and the Genestealer cults, but it was not just the presence of human Tyranid hybrids that surprised them. Givasa auxiliaries talked of miracles that often occurred around the Imperium's priest caste, defying any scientific understanding. The reports told of strange anomalies of human behavior. Sometimes outbursts of violent insanity even occurred amongst the Givasa themselves. Meanwhile, strange portents were seen by the Chalnath Expanse's Genestealer cults. Many expected the arrival of the Star Child to be heralded by a great veil of shadow and silence, according to their scripture and founding legends. When their leaders observed an increase in human psychic potential on their worlds, and a rising number of their own Maguses being born, they were concerned. For many, these omens meant one thing: the Star Child deemed them unworthy, and they would have to fight all the harder for their deity's attention and blessings. With the Imperials clinging harder to their own oppressive faith, and the Tau invaders' false creed of the greater good capturing the minds of countless humans, many Genestealer cults rose up in the name of the Star Children they so revered and worshipped. They would assert the strength of their deities, and in doing so, prove their own worthiness. Some even saw the increased number of Maguses as a positive sign, a weapon given to them by the Star Child to destroy their enemies. In the eyes of the Imperium, the Xenos threatened the very souls of the people. The great cathedra of the Ministorum sent out their priests far and wide, believing that only unshakable faith could see mankind through this most severe of tests. The knowledge that the Emperor protects reassured all, from the lowest factory menial to the greatest planetary lord. The Emperor had seen them safe for thousands of years, through great trials and turbulent times, and he would see them safe through this one too. Or so the gilded vox horns in every Habblock Manufactorum and Basilica blared. No, that can't be right. Could you play it again, please? The bridge of the Tau warship, Glimmerstar, was only dimly lit, most of the crew off duty, and only 2 Tau huddled around a holographic projector discreetly built into a white panel. One of them was Oyeldinar, known to his subordinates as Silverwing. The other Tau was his communications officer, Pur-Ui Vaskar. She glanced at her commander for a moment and nodded, working the input panels of the communication station to restart the message they had just received from a battered, lonely interstellar drone. Once more, Commander Shadowsun appeared as a transparent hologram, seemingly directing her words to the 2 watching Tau as she spoke to a messenger drone. She seemed tired, and her voice lacked its usual confidence. "This is Oshesera speaking. I hope this message arrives in time for you to be warned, in time for you to act. We successfully traversed the star-tied nexus and established contact with our lost brothers and sisters of the fourth sphere. As suspected, they had suffered a failure of their AL-38 slipstream modules, but we don't understand exactly what happened yet. For your reference, I have attached the recordings of their surveillance drones. Most of the material was far too corrupted to gain useful information. The segments that were not, well, see for yourselves. As Oyeldinar and Uivashka watched on, the hologram changed to show images from the inside of a Tau ship. Despite having already seen the whole message, Oyeldinar swallowed hard and averted his eyes for a moment. He did not desire to see the torn and ravaged corpses of the settlers again, the spattered blood on the walls, the terror in their dead eyes. These brave colonists entered the wormhole of the Starstride Nexus in search of new worlds to spread the teachings of the greater good, Shadowsun's voice continued, as the hologram switched back to her. But they found only death. The few survivors, they have changed. As soon as they laid eyes upon our unfamiliar auxiliary troops, they reacted with open animosity. There is no trace of their own. Investigations are still ongoing, but none of the Fourth Sphere survivors are willing to speak of the events before our arrival. Shadowsun paused for a moment and listened to some indiscernible words from outside of the field of view of the hologram. She nodded before she went on. I have to make this short. Despite the traumatic events our brothers and sisters of the Fourth Sphere fleets have suffered through, as soon as reunited, we began the expansion of the Fifth Sphere in earnest. Soon, we established new colonies on worlds. We wrestled from the grip of Bigel, Guela, and Yaha. However, each time we met the Guela in combat, the survivors of the Fourth Sphere committed atrocities far beyond every necessity of war. It was problematic. Unfortunately, further interrogations into the cause of these troubling actions had to wait. We have recently come under attack by a new foe. Our enemies seem to be Guela nature, but nothing like we have encountered before. The face of the famous Tau commander looked haunted for a moment. They called themselves the Death Guard, and we have learned that they do so rightfully. The hologram now showed a group of warriors, clad in heavy armor, advancing through thick fog. They looked not unlike the Geron Shah, the Space Marines, but they seemed bloated and repulsive. As Olya Dinar and Uivaska watched, they opened fire with their primitive bolters, gunning down a group of Guevasa. Every booming shot they fired somehow sounded wet. Inexorably, the warriors advanced, crunching stones and corpses underneath their mutated feet. The Imperium may shun the teachings of the greater good. They may be primitive and barbaric, Shadowsun continued, but these humans are not part of the Imperium. They are worse. In congenital greed for power that plagues all their kind, they formed a terrible alliance. The hologram switched to show a revolting mound of putrid flesh with a grinning face and splintered horns. Immediately, the quality of the picture dropped noticeably. The creature swung a rusty blade and cut a crisis battlesuit in half. Another Shasui attacked with his burst cannons. The blubbering skin of the monstrous figure caved in, only to reveal a horde of smaller beasts, cackling and spilling forth to bury the tower underneath their mass. The Shasui screamed, but his voice did not come from the speakers. It seemed to be resounding everywhere on the Glimmer Stars bridge at once. The lights flickered, and the hologram abruptly vanished. The scream seemed to linger for a moment. Oyeldinar and Uivaska looked at each other and said nothing. A similar thing had happened the first time they had watched the message. But the screams of the dying were somehow different this time. It almost seemed as if they were closer. Neither of them understood, and neither of them dared to try. Moments later, the hologram came back to life as if nothing had happened. It now showed a sparkling reddish nebula between flickering stars. When Oyeldinar looked up, he could see a similar off-putting nebula outside the iron-shielded and reinforced cupola of the Glimmer Stars bridge. Similar, yet far away from where the message had been recorded. It was the Starstride Nexus. Commander Silverwing and his fleet were part of the heavily armed Tau garrison on this side of it, the Zone of Silence. The message had come from the other side. With all of the information he had about the Nexus, Oyeldinar wondered how the messenger drone had even survived the dangerous crossing. The hologram now showed a Tau fleet coming into view. By the look of it, the ships had been through several engagements showing scorch marks and improvised repairs. These Gweilar cannot be reasoned or bargained with, Shadowsun's voice returned, even less so than the rest of their kin. In the same way the Gweilar of the Imperium adhere to their Emperor, these monstrous aliens have turned to the savage worship of a being called Nurg-Hel. It seems they fell victim to a host of maladies while simultaneously developing a strange resistance against them, becoming dangerous vectors which must be stopped at all costs. Nurg-Hel? Whispered Uivaska. Again the bright light of the glimmer star flickered. Oyeldinar tried to ignore it. In the past 3 Vecta, our troops have met this dangerous foe in numerous engagements, Shadowsun continued in the hologram. The warriors of the Death Guard have attacked us on multiple front lines. They are extremely resilient. We are outnumbered, and we are outgunned. Oyeldinar shook his head in silence as he watched the message. Impossible. This seemed like a desperate acknowledgement of a superior foe. I hope this message arrives in time for you to be warned. These were the words Shadowsun had begun with, a warning. Thus, Commander Shadowsun spoke on. I have come to a decision. We cannot stop the Death Guard this side of the Starside Nexus. After dozens of battles, our fleets are too damaged. Our strength has depleted to a point that we cannot halt this incursion any longer. If we still want to secure the expansion of the Nemya Atoll, we are now forced to choose, and we choose the latter. We are trusting in you, our comrades beyond the Nexus, to counteract the Death Guard threat. With these words, the hologram changed to once again show an outside view. In front of the deep galactic wound of the Starstride Nexus, the fleet of Tau warships were approaching an armada of crude vessels. Even by human standards, these ships seemed primitive and outdated to Oyeldinar. But that was the most disquieting thing about them. Far worse were the malignant fleshy growths that covered the ships in a wholly perverted and unnatural fashion. Porous flesh boils suppurated pus-like matter into the void. Disgustingly bloated eyes the size of orca dropships blinked lazily at the oncoming Tau fleet, and enormous tentacles swayed like seaweed. The most terrifying thing of all, though, was the sheer size of the fleet, which outnumbered the Tau by far. As I record this message, Shadowsun said, we are closing in for a final engagement with the enemy's main fleet. The hologram returned to Shadowsun as she paused and checked a series of screens and data. Projections are grim, but we shall do as much damage as we can before withdrawing. I will help you in this way, but I cannot allow my forces to deplete beyond a point where I risk my own campaign. Even now, I fear I could risk too much, but it is for the greater good. I showed you what we face, what you will have to face. It might be against the teachings of Pure Tide for us to intervene one last time, but it is the least we... Suddenly, the hologram flickered, and Shadowsun looked at something outside the picture. Damage report. Shield generators compromised. An artificial voice droned in the background. We have lost back Squall and Ivory. Another voice reported from elsewhere. Shadowsun closed her eyes for a split second before readdressing the drone. I have even less time than I anticipated, she said with more urgency than before. We are certain that the Death Guard aim to cross the Startide Nexus. We will try to stall them as long as we can, but we cannot stop them. The hologram flickered again as Shadowsun's ship was hit. Oyeldinar wondered if the commander had survived the engagement, or if he was witnessing her final words. I can only hope this drone arrives at the zone of silence intact, Shadowsun went on, and that we can hold the enemy at bay long enough for you to prepare yourselves for their coming. Tidestrike and Zephyr Bond reporting boarding parties, someone from outside the field of view said. Moon's Heart reporting several hits with some of... Moon's Heart, please repeat. Some sort of mucus-ridden energy beam. Corrosion damage on multiple decks. Shadowsun nodded in acknowledgement. Moon's Heart, disengage and retreat. All available crew, prepare countermeasures on Tidestrike and Zephyr Bond. All Corel, maintain attack pattern. The picture shook once more as the Clarity Blade, Shadowsun's own flagship, took a heavy hit, and the commander reeled for a second before she could steady herself. All disposable energy to the front shield generators, Shadowsun commanded. Watch out for that unidentified object on our flank. She glanced at the messenger drone for the last time. The tiredness had vanished from her eyes, replaced by the determination of a true Tau commander. "End recording," she said. "All ships, prepare for K-on maneuver and—" The hologram abruptly cut to nothing. Aboard the Glimmer Star, Oyeldinar and Uivaska looked at each other, then up at the void outside their warship. It was empty, apart from their own fleet and the heavily armed space stations of the Tau Empire guarding this side of the Startide Nexus. "When was this message recorded?" Oyeldinar asked. Uivaska indicated to the time stamp. "There is no way of mistaking it, Commander." Oyeldinar shook his head. "This cannot be right. If it was correct, then the enemy fleet would have arrived by now." "Maybe Shadowsun defeated the Gwalar after all," Uivaska suggested. "There is simply no way they could have stopped a fleet of that size. Stalled? Yes. Defeated? Not even Shadowsun could do it." Oyeldinar looked warily up at the stars, as if anticipating the appearance of a virulent fleet at any given second. "Consider the sheer extent of the Startide Nexus. She simply hasn't enough ships to stop every enemy vessel from entering. We have recently detected growing distortions in the Nexus, Commander. Maybe the enemy fleet was destroyed on its way here," Uivaska offered. "In the same way as the Fourth Sphere expansion fleet. Or maybe the alliance of the Gwalar and their associates has ended and this near gale has attacked them." "Too uncertain," Commander said curtly. "What if there was some kind of temporal distortion? What if the enemy fleet knows a way out of the Nexus that we don't?" Uivaska couldn't answer his questions and stayed silent. "We have to account for Shadowsun's warning. We have to be prepared. Fleets do not simply vanish," Oyeldinar said. Together, they stared out into the void, which remained unsettlingly empty. The Raising of Astorgius. The Imperial Cardinal World of Astorgius was celebrated across the sector for its magnificent architecture, incredible wealth, and priceless relics. When the planet's unshakable devotion to the Emperor saw its leaders reject the Tau's overtures without hesitation, Commander Shadowsun herself led the resulting assault. The severed heads of the Tau delegation were sent to meet Astorgius's leadership, presented to Shadowsun in 5 large gilded chests lined with plush red velvet, one for each caste. The humans had shown that they knew the difference between the castes, that they had listened to the Tau delegates and murderously rejected them all the same. The death of the Ethereal in particular made Shadowsun's blood boil. She resolved that an example must be made of these Gwalar. Such an act would surely bring others into the fold of the Tova more peacefully. Shadowsun took solace in the fact that countless more diplomatic efforts were being made all over Kishval, the Tau's name for Astorgius. Hundreds of watercast agents met in secret with middle-ranking laymen across the planet. They learned that the united front presented by Astorgius's governing body was in fact a thin veneer that concealed the world's highly fractious politics. Every family had aspirations, fears, rivals and enemies, all exploitable by the Tau. In some places the Tau formed agreements, promising positions of influence after the planet's fall in exchange for alliance. In others, Tau troops trained in clandestine warfare launched raids against specific targets, the goal to make attacks resemble those of rival factions. Insurrectionists were encouraged and armed. Intelligence was gathered, constantly feeding data into Shadowsun's growing picture of a future battlescape. Some reports were more disturbing and unexpected. Deep in crypts, tunnels and other hidden areas, Tau reconnaissance elements found strange graffiti depicting worms or serpents. Some even recorded sightings of multi-limbed creatures scurrying away into the darkness. At this stage none could say with certainty what these beings were, though the Tau were aware that weakness in human genetics sometimes led to ugly mutations and freak births. In keeping with her mastery of Kaon, the art of patient hunter, Shadowsun did not launch her assault on Astorgius for months. She knew that the more undermined and fractured the planet's leadership was, the swifter her campaign would be overall. By the time Tau dropships launched in their thousands, Astorgius was on the brink of civil war. Such were Shadow Sun's preparations that not even alien conquest was threat enough to bring Astorgius' conflicting factions together. Nonetheless, those intending to resist readied themselves. All over Astorgius, the vast cathedral cities that made up the bulk of its inhabited areas revealed their capabilities. Gilded domes opened like blossoming flowers to reveal banks of anti-air cannons. Panes of stained glass windows, hundreds of meters long, slid into frames to unveil huge hangar bays filled with swift fighter craft. Processions of robe-clad monks took to the streets and barracks, whipping up crowds of people and ranks of soldiers into frenzies of hatred for their alien. The tower made no direct assaults against the formidable defences, seeing such a strategy as a waste of lives and resources. Instead, their warriors were deployed in those urban districts deemed friendly following the Watercast campaigns, or in the vast open spaces that were maintained as pleasure gardens, game parks, or simply left wild. Nevertheless, the Tau contingents moved into battle swiftly, determined to bring the fight for Keshval to a swift conclusion. Armoured interdiction cadres duelled Astra Militarum armoured companies in the Sagittarian fields, hammerheads picking off Lehman Russ battle tanks with their devastating railguns. The urban sprawl of Belenok was stalked by roving tribes of Kroot, working in tandem with breacher cadres, their task to root out hunkered-down human infantry that had created a veritable fortress of razor-wire weapon pits and bunkers. Kroot carnivores used their keen hunting senses to discover well-concealed Gwalar soldiers, while breacher teams employed their advanced close-quarters training to destroy human positions with their pulse blasters. Battles played out across the world as the Tau upkept a constant stream of hit-and-run attacks. Shadow Sun desired to demonstrate the Tau's military superiority by defeating as many of the fanatical enemy as possible to force surrender without giving the Imperium anything like a solid victory of its own. But that surrender never came. Human resistance was dogged, their belief in their Emperor especially strong. Shadow Sun was particularly troubled by accounts of miracles, as the Gevasa human prisoners described them. Some told of blinding light that obscured the charges of hundreds of human troops before they smashed into fire warrior lines. Others were barely credible tales of priest types flying through the air with vicious chain blades to carve through battlesuits in mid-flight. Whatever the reports, none conformed to the physical laws as the Tower understood them, yet drone-recorded battle footage showed such events occurring. So persuasive were some of these events that elements of the Gevasa turned on their Tower allies, screaming their repentance as they opened fire on those they had called comrades only minutes before. Frequent breakouts of insanity occurred in the Tower ranks, of the same kind the Tower had encountered after the Vow of Hope emerged. As before, these were confined to humans and other non-Tau species, and were swiftly concealed by the Tower hierarchy. Any Tower discovered referring to strange aliens stepping out of the ruined corpses of insane humans were quarantined and dispatched to special hospitals for recovery. When a detachment of 4th Sphere Tower was discovered by the 5th Sphere allies killing prisoners, including humans who had already embraced the greater good, its commander stated that one day the rest of the Empire would thank him before he took the Malklar. As the fighting raged on all over Astorgius, Shadow Sun looked keenly for a crucial weakness that she could capitalize on to bring the bloody war to an end. The humans' morale was strong, stronger than she had ever seen elsewhere. They held to their beliefs with a vigor that almost defied imagination. Their faith was their life. It was their greatest strength. Could that make it their greatest weakness? Gathered intelligence indicated that the humans fought hard over sites and artifacts of particular religious significance, that if these fell or were captured, acts of individual surrender spiked. When human propaganda boasts that not a single cathedral city had fallen, Shadow Sun knew her next move. She would topple the planet's greatest cathedral city, Iglesor Magna. The capture of such a place would surely cripple the resolve of the staunchest human defenders. They would know their Emperor was not with them when the broadcast filled with Tau declarations of victory and peace offerings to those humans that still resisted began in earnest. Shadow Sun's forces, made to surround Iglesor Magna, Potential human relief forces were subject to relentless assault as Riptide and Ghostkill battlesuits ambushed armoured columns, and innumerable swarms of drones were deployed to harass infantry forces. Tower contingents surrounding the Cathedral City were under strict orders from Shadowsun to leave clear a passage outwards. She could not rest the defenders believing that they had no option but a fight to the death. Escape had to be seen as a real possibility for them, though Shadowsun's forces were secretly placed to kill or capture any that actually attempted to break out. The Tau intercepted and hacked all human communications and broadcast demands to surrender. Those that handed themselves over, they declared, would be offered food, water and safety. Not one Gwalar capitulated. Advanced infiltration cadres made the first forays into Iglisor Magna, striking from all directions. They expected fierce resistance from the outset, their only mission to identify defensive emplacements and mark them out for destruction. However, they were actually able to advance several kilometers into the city, past abandoned defensive cannons and bunkers. They did not know why the Gwalar had yielded these positions, and Shadowsun cautiously ordered her follow-up contingents to begin securing them, so that they could not be reoccupied by the humans. Hundreds of fire warrior teams tactically advanced from gilded column to gilded column, through small chapels, accommodation for menials, and enormous basilicas, large enough to house dozens of armoured vehicles. Shadowsun believed that the absence of defenders could only mean a trap, so the advanced cadres were ordered to take deliberate care. In spite of herself, Shadowsun looked forward to the humans' efforts to attack her well-trained warriors, and to seeing them fail. But she underestimated her opposition. Hundreds of unsuspecting fire warriors were killed when parts of ceiling frescoes were peeled away to reveal murder holes through which the defenders dropped explosives and grenades. Trapdoors large enough to swallow storm surges opened up beneath the advancing Tau forces. Those unfortunate to fall through were butchered by zealots or destroyed by the autocannons and lascannons of waiting heavy weapons teams. And so began months of guerrilla warfare and counterinsurgency actions. Kayon and Montcar strategies were carried out at squad level. The humans knew every secret passage of their cathedral city, using them to their immense advantage, and in doing so claiming countless Tau lives. The Tau drew the defenders into ambushes and kill zones of their own, utilizing the secret passageway network themselves where they discovered it, or deliberately threatening certain artifacts or shrines to draw out Iglisor Magna's rogue defenders. As casualties mounted, Shadowsun refused to overcommit her forces in all-out assault. To do so would be to throw away lives. And as the noose of Tau forces tightened around the defenders, surrenders seemed inevitable. But no surrender came. Shadowsun also had to withdraw her Gavasa forces, whose brutality towards the defenders had grown to heights she could not tolerate. Torture of prisoners and mutilation of the dead were common. Some Gavasa openly wore jewelry made from the extracted teeth of dead Astorians. They frequently disobeyed orders to hold position, instead pursuing retreating foes, making themselves and others vulnerable in the process. Strange anomalies and sanity outbreaks became more frequent where humans fought other humans. Despite all this, the Tau were winning. More territory was secured with each passing day as the defenders' numbers depleted and their supplies ran low. The desperation of Shadowsun's enemies was finally revealed when thousands of them launched an overwhelming attack to break out. They were nearly successful, such was the surprise they achieved. Thundering companies of battle tanks and tens of thousands of zealous troops came perilously close to overrunning the city's western districts. It was only thanks to Tau discipline and the careful redeployment of rapid response cadres, full of crisis battlesuits and devilfish-mounted fire warrior teams, that the attack was stymied. The failure of this assault broke the defenders' back. Such were the resources required to launch it, and finally, pockets of emaciated and terrified humans began to surrender. The pace of the Tau's advance soon quickened, and the noose tightened completely. Shadowsun herself took the field in the final battles of the conflict, as the last of Iglisor Magna's starving humans surrendered or were cut down. Her twin fusion blasters incinerated countless defenders, melting through scores of bunkers. Shadowsun's victory at Iglisor Magna was projected all over Keshwal, the glory of the Tauvar shown for all to see. The ethereals of the fifth sphere smiled. knowing that surely this spelled the end of human resistance on the planet. Watercast aides prepared victory speeches, but the move was premature. Seeing the mighty spheres of Iglosaur Magna topple to the ground and shatter into millions of pieces had simply stiffened the resolve of those who still fought. With sadness, Shadowsun had little choice but to accept that much blood was still to be spilled, though humanity's suicidal drive to fight regardless of casualties made her shudder. After the battle's conclusion, Commander Shadowsun walked the ward of Hospital Ship 227. So many of these vessels had been constructed since the Damocles Crusade that the Tau had ceased naming them. Shadowsun had come unannounced, dressed in simple robes. Bunk after bunk was filled with wounded and dying Tau. Many had lost limbs, while others were held down with tight restraints, driven mad by horror. Earthcast orderlies rushed past bearing medicines and surgical equipment, so busy that they failed to notice that Shadowsun herself walked amongst them. Each hospital ship had capacity for around 5,000 wounded. Every one of the dozens in Astorgius' orbit were operating well beyond those limits. Shadowsun saw the dead jettisoned from airlocks in their hundreds. They would normally have been burned in honorable funeral ceremonies, but such were their numbers and the demand for space that there was simply no time to observe tradition. The commander knew that not one of the fallen would begrudge this necessity. None of it mattered so long as it was done for the greater good. Battle still raged on Astorgius, and Shadowsun would not let their sacrifice be in vain.
Is that it?
Oppressor's End. Thorvek pressed his full weight onto the witch, who lay on the alley's rough ground.
Oh, great, a good part.
He pinned the psyker's arms beneath his knees and smothered the man's mouth so that no curses could be spat. From the alley's mouth, Holland looked back nervously. Thorvek muttered a prayer, hurried but heartfelt, before swiftly drawing a blessed dagger across the man's thick neck. The cut was clean, efficiently made, and blood welled out immediately. It flowed over the man's neck and down the alley, before pooling in a stinking, litter-choked drain that was already buzzing with cryptilids. The witch's convulsions ceased, with a final spurt of bloody froth that covered Thorvek's apron. He swore silently. Evidence. They had prepared for this problem, but it was still something Thorvek could have avoided. If the Imperial lapdog now dead beneath him hadn't been so damned strong, he could have covered his throat as he planned. Goethe would deal with it. Pantomime, bless her. She was incredibly skilled in swiftly excising incriminating stains and dyes out of the most impliable fabric. So skilled, in fact, that senior leaders from other cells of the Mind Cord, even beyond Thorvek's home city of Grezum, begged for her training as often as secrecy would allow. Home city. Not for long, he thought. Not now that salvation was on its way. It meant a better life for all of the faithful of the cult of the Mind Cord, not least for Thorvek, for kind-eyed Goethe, and for the small star angel she was swiftly bearing to term. At the alley's end, Holland shifted incessantly from foot to foot. The lookout was constantly on edge, it seemed, at least when not in the pastor's presence. Holland's eyes and ears were the best in the cell, though. Working out on the slag fields on the outskirts of Grezum meant his eyesight and hearing were incredibly sharp. They had to be, for all sorts of predatory lice stalked the slag. "Are you done?" hissed back Thorvek, eager to get out of such an enclosed space. Thorvek swiftly signed for the lookout to wait. He placed the tip of the blessed dagger onto the psyker's forehead, still warm and caped in grimy sweat, and drew a wafer-thin rag of filthy cloth from his overall. Thorvek consulted the simple image scratched in charcoal on the rag, and began to carve an identical one on the witch's head. He made sure that the cuts were ragged, pressing hard to incise the skull beneath, just as the pastor had instructed. Soon the bloody shape of an eye was riven into the psyker's smooth forehead. The red eye mirrored the chalked oculus that Grezum's governor had scrawled on the backs of rounded-up psykers as his troops paraded them on the way to the black camps. More importantly, bloodily carved like this, and with a cleanly slit throat, The mark bore all the signs on recent vigilante attacks on those bearing even a whiff of sorcery about them. Looking at his work, Thorvek instinctively rubbed his own forehead in the same spot, massaging the tiredness he felt over the shallow, bony ridges there. The 5 sacred ridges were his inheritance, dating all the way back to when the Serena Paternoster arrived as the emissary of the Star Child. Thorvek felt happy, despite the dull ache. Everything was as the pastor had wished, expressed in the man's mellow voice. Other cells had rather outlandish names for the statuesque man, Cognosk or Viapater, and to Holland he was always the pastor, but Thorvek had been personally invited to address him as the Magus. The Magus, always so admirably in touch with dealings round the city, had told Thorvek and Holland how the governor's expanding corps of witch-finders were equipped with some new off-world tech. The governor had told his councillors that he had negotiated a pact with the Adeptus Mechanicus, but the devices looked like no work of the tech priests. They were smooth, subtly carved, like nothing the Magus's mind-cord contacts had seen before. These psi-hunting bands of armoured agents were trawling dangerous areas of Grism in 50-strong gangs, often followed by a mob of hate-filled civilians. Thorvek could sympathise, hating witches intensely. Many loyal brothers and sisters of the Mind Cord's scattered cells had joined these hunts, helping their fellow Grezi root out the foulness, even if the rest were unbelievers. Yet, imagine such an unthinking mob, the Magus had mused, witnessing the simple and honest miracle gifted to the cult of the Mind Cord. What then? These witch-finders, too, the oppressors' tools that they were, would they understand? Everything the Serena Paternoster had done to save them would be in vain. The Star Children might even turn aside from this world in shame. The Magus had spoken sadly of his worry, and Thorvek had ached to do something to help him. Even the thought of that brief meeting with the Magus warmed Thorvek through. Since their earliest boyish memory of a blessing at the man's hand, Thorvek had seen the guiding light of the cult only a handful of times in person. Yet often did a mental image of the Magus come to mind during vital work for the cult, sealing uniforms, monitoring sentry patterns, and reconnoitering possible new sanctums. All were carried out with the reassuring presence of the Magus's eyes at the back of his mind. Thorvek had jokingly told himself the Magus watched Thorvek's dealings through his servant's eyes. Yet with the miracles the man wrought, who was Thorvek to say that that wasn't exactly what had occurred? Psychers, Thorvek thought bitterly. The tyrannical overlords of Gresm sought to buy the docile obedience of its citizens by hunting the witches down, all the while pampering their pet sorcerers. There had been so many more purges recently, but with the oppressors' increased trawls, with witchfinders and their off-world tech, came the increased risk of the security of the Mind Cord cells. It was a blessing, then. A portent, the Magus had called it, that the cult of the Mind Cord had been blessed with so many workers of simple miracles. It was a sign. After all these generations of preparation, it was the sign. "Come on," he called sharply to Holland. The lookout ran to where they had dumped the psycher's body, and together they wove into the darkness of crumbling alleys. Thorvek liked the wiry man, who was favoured with a violet cast, his hairline just about concealed. "I hate this place," Holland spat. "Why do we have to drag that witch all the way out here? This is King Jaren's patch. Even slaggers like me know that. That old smuggler's had his forces killed before now. He wouldn't think twice if he caught us here." "That's the point. You trust the Magus, the pastor, don't you?" Holland looked appalled. "Yes, of course You know I do. Think about it. The cult catch that off-world Imperial witch sniffing around the pastor's private chambers, right? That filthy mind spy gets found here shanked by Vigis. Now that we've got loyalty in the mobs, we'll make sure he's discovered by the witchfinders. But King Jaren isn't some lowlife the governor can walk over. The witchfinders tramp here, there'll be war." "Yeah, there will." Thorvek grinned, and slapped his friend's lumpen back as he saw realization dawn.
Nice.
It's happening, Hall.
Bit of progress.
In our lifetime, it's finally happening.
Very cool.
Their presses will be slaughtered. Patamine, Holland breathed. He smiled in ecstasy, pointed yellow teeth gleaming. Less than a week later, Grism burned. To Thorvek's awe, the Serena Paternoster's tireless agents across the entire continent had revealed their hand as one united people. Grism convulsed in the throes of a war between the city governor and the huge resources of King Jared's criminal under-empire. Their former backroom agreement swept aside in blood. The city didn't blaze alone. From his vantage point at a high window of a derelict factorum, Thorvek saw at least 3 satellite cities in flames. How he wished his grandfather could have laid his lidless eyes on a scene and known this moment. Below Thorvek, the briefest of violet spark flared. Ascension hour had come at last.
Yeah, so I've been going for
His
almost
perfectly executed luring of the murdered Imperial
hours.
investigator had earned
Take a
Thorvek
bit of a
high
break
praise.
myself.
Now he led what would be the cult's first open blow against
just
the
trying
Empressor.
to hash out all the little
Thorvek stalked
little
down
details.
through the abandoned factorum, and like oily
it's like-
shadows, the
it's the
fighters of his
rivet,
cell
you
slipped
know,
along
the
in
rivets
his wake.
hitting
By the time
those.
they poured silently out of
One
a
of those
rear
things where
loading
it's just
bay,
like, yeah,
almost
you can
30
hit it with
dedicated
silver,
warriors and sisters of the
but
cult
you also
of
wanna
Mind
put a
Cord
little
crept
wash on it,
alongside
dirty it up a
Thorvek.
little bit, try
In
to
the
make it pop
twilight,
out a little
greasy
bit
rain
more.
soaked them. They looked ragged, their
These
grime-smeared
I think
surf
I hit 'em a
coveralls
bit
layered
heavy.
over stolen flak
Maybe heavier
jackets.
than I wanted,
The
but,
bolt-action
it is
rifles,
dirty.
brutalist autoguns,
It
and
is supposed to
even
kinda have that
antique
look.
hunting
You know,
arquebuses
there's
were
a
born
bit
in a
grime and
mismatch of
stuff that kinda
firepower.
collects
They were
along
nothing like the recent
those-
propaganda
those
vids spewed by the
spots and
governor.
everything.
With his honor-guarded practice rangers in neatly
So,
pressed uniforms
I'm
firing
gonna do
their
better
new
on that
Grism
brush
pattern
stroke,
plasma
too.
long rifles.
Uh,
Stolen
Gotta
vidlogs
try
from
to
the
be able to
governor's
keep
chambers
my
had also
wrist
shown
straight
him
when I'm trying
cajoling
to
the
just
city's
make a
wealthy with tales of
straight
new
little line.
backers. He jabbered off
Some of
better
'em tend to
weapons
have
for the
little
city state's
flips, little
militias,
flippies
off-world
at the end.
investment and global unity. Thorvek's target was an outer defense post of the city militia. Its unimportance made it the ideal less. In a time
Oh, good call, good call. No, I was just saying that, just going over all these little rivet details, trying to throw the wash in there so the rivets kind of pop out. Just getting all messy in there. I do got to do the headlamps that are in there. I should probably do the camera. There's probably a camera on that gun. A lamp of some sort. But definitely good progress. So I did all of that basically yesterday, and then today I guess I kind of tried to complete the bottom. The bottom's kind of hard to show. Let's see. I'm not necessarily too worried about the bottom. Bottom might, it's not what everybody's gonna see, but yeah, just a bit on there. I gotta put the door on. Still gotta actually kind of paint the door. I got the tail section done, kind of top and bottom. So I think that's a good spot right now. I am gonna have to go back over on a few of those rivets just to kind of put a little silver on them. Man, then I'll have to stare at this for a long time and figure out what else do I need to do. That's part of my brainstorming, is I'll just sit here for like 20 minutes just looking at it. Partially admiring my own work, I do like it. It's getting there. I'm starting to feel the vibe of the weather damage, and starting to feel more and more complete as I keep painting. But practicing, working on it. Yeah. Then I think I have another little, like, what is it? Marine air vehicle that I could paint up similar. But I think I want to get it back into some Necrons in a bit. Actually, no, I'm waiting for my buddy. He's sending me a package. I should get it this week. It's all of his X-Men 2.0 ships and stuff. So I might be painting those cool little tiny ships. So that'll be fun. But I think I am. Yeah. Pika, I'll take a break from this. Glad you were kind of hanging out, listening to some lore. Good stuff. And yeah, find Baltimore's Guide to Warhammer on YouTube. It's good. But yeah, enjoy your day, and yeah, I'll catch up with you soon.